in peace.
I thank the member for Corangamite and I call the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the people of Mallee on this condolence motion to acknowledge the recent passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I remember as a child standing in the old quadrangle of my primary school every Monday morning, rain, hail or shine, and singing God Save Our Queen as the Australian flag was hoisted up the flagpole. We stood in class lines and affirmed our allegiance to Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen of Australia. As I reflect on those memories, I think the ritual embedded a sense of respect for authority more broadly. That was back in the 1960s. I reflect on the stability that the Queen has provided to Australia and indeed the world over 7 decades. As the Leader of the Opposition stated yesterday, if grief is the price we pay for love, quoting the Queen, then the outpouring of global grief in these past 2 weeks speaks to just how much she was loved. I remember countless televised Christmas messages from the Queen, where she addressed the Commonwealth of Nations, not just Britain, with a message of hope. No matter how harrowing events may have been throughout the year and across the globe, due to war, natural disaster, recessions or pandemics even, somehow she brought us all together to face a new year with optimism. The late Queen reigned over 16 Australian Prime Ministers, from Menzies to the current Prime Minister, and over 16 Governor-Generals, and visited Australia 16 times. In my electorate of Mallee, she visited Maryborough, Mildura, Irimple and Redcliffs in 1954 and then Swan Hill in 1970. When she was just 21 years old, Princess Elizabeth said, "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." And she kept her word for 70 years. Queen Elizabeth came to timelessly represent the virtues of service, sacrifice, duty, humility and hard work. She walked the talk. To my way of thinking, there has been no greater role model to women in leadership than Queen Elizabeth II. Following her coronation in 1953, the Queen said, "I have in sincerity pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Throughout all my life and with all my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your trust." She not only earned our trust, she also won our hearts. Queen Elizabeth II was and will continue to be held in respect and deep affection by our nation, the people of the Commonwealth and around the world. She leaves a legacy of service, faith, stability, sacrifice and strength. Through dark days and times of triumph, and though the world changed constantly, she remained steadfast in her devotion to God, her family, her country and the Commonwealth of Nations. Deputy Speaker, there is no greater honour than a child being named after you. I know, because one of my grandchildren is named after me. And indeed, royal names have been popular choices for many newborns. When Princess Elizabeth became Queen, baby girls across the world were named Elizabeth for years, and I am one. My husband was named Philip after her husband, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, yes, with one L. I was deeply honoured to represent my electorate of Mallee at the National Memorial Service for Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in Canberra yesterday. As we have now proclaimed our new sovereign, King Charles III, we look with anticipation to the service he will bring to Australia and to the Commonwealth. He has inherited a matchless legacy. On behalf of the people of Mallee, I thank Her Majesty, the late Queen, for her life of service and look to His Majesty King Charles III for his solemn devotion to continue for our nation. God save the King.
Thank the member for Mallee and I call the member for Layla.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise to add my and the community I represent's condolences on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In preparing to speak today, I was struck, like many in the chamber and many that have expressed it, the longevity, the 70-year reign of Queen Elizabeth. And in doing so, and in doing the research around the questions we've all been asking in preparation for today, did the Queen visit my electorate? And the answer for me was proudly yes, she did in 1954. Young Queen Elizabeth visited just the outskirts of the electorate. I noticed the member for Jellybrands here, and I'm going to be talking about her visit to the Point Cook to Rathbase Williams in 1954. And I note that there may be a few exceptions, but most of us in this room weren't born when she visited Rathbase Williams in Point Cook that day. And it was a warm summer day and she was returning, the member for Corangamite's in front of me. That day she had been to Geelong, the train came back through, stopped at Aircraft Station, and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip travelled to do a review, if you like, of the troops. And what was important that day was that she was visiting the first RAF base in Australia, the oldest RAF base in Australia, but more importantly, the women's units from across Melbourne were there. And it was noted in The Age 2 days later that the car that the Queen was travelling in slowed down for her to take special notice of the women in the RAAF at Point Cook that day. And it got me thinking about her reign. And I think it's worth noting that in this length of tenure, the best way that I can explain that to my community is that it's best shown by the fact that on her first visit in 1954, Her Majesty was welcomed by Sir William Slim as Governor-General and Sir Robert Menzies as Prime Minister. In her last visit, those positions were filled by Dame Quentin Bryce and Ms Julia Gillard. In that 70-year span, many have noted today how much the world had changed. I want to focus on how much the world had changed for women. And this whole thing has got me thinking about my mum, who I obviously lost quite recently, and most people know that, who was a great fan of Queen Elizabeth and a contemporary of Queen Elizabeth. And it got me thinking about what it would have meant to my 23-year-old mother when Elizabeth ascended to the throne and became Queen, and what it meant to all the women of her generation, who we often say of that generation that they're known for their stoicism, they're known for their practicality, for the way they dealt with life. And I think Queen Elizabeth led them in the development of those things that we say about that generation of people. But I wonder about my young mother, before children, watching Elizabeth become Queen and having that journey, that 70-year journey with her, watching a woman as a leader in a very male-dominated industry, let's be blunt, other than Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth I, a very male-dominated industry. And they became aware and they asked questions, I assume, that wouldn't have been asked had Elizabeth not been Queen. That Queen Elizabeth being Queen caused them to observe, to ask questions of themselves, of their lifestyle, and in doing so changed the way not just the women in Australia and across the Commonwealth saw their roles, but possibly the way their husbands and partners saw women as well. And that played a major part in the reason I'm sitting here in the House of Representatives today, surrounded by my female colleagues. So I think there's something really important about Elizabeth's reign that we should pause and we should remember, because it was Elizabeth leaving her child at home to tour Australia. Questions would have been asked. Could I be the Queen? Could I leave my children for the 8 weeks, 10 weeks that this was going to take? Asking questions and then answering those questions in their own daughters' and sons' lives by changing expectations about our roles and saying the Queen was able to be an international leader and be a mother, and a grandmother and a great-grandmother. Rest in peace, Queen Elizabeth. And I hope my mum and you are sharing a cup of tea right now.
Thank the member for Layla. And I call the member for Bonner. Forrest, sorry.
And I'm very pleased to rise to speak on this condolence motion on the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the accession of King Charles III. I want to offer my condolences to her family, her people, both in the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and all of those who are mourning her passing. But I want to celebrate this amazing woman, her devotion to duty, the grace, the dignity, the courage. She was a peacemaker. She was committed to her faith and has been described as a gentle Christian soul. She had respect for all those she met, showing strength in the toughest times, the one stable, constant globally. She was measured but strong, that iron fist in the velvet glove. She grew up never expecting to be queen. The abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936 when she was just 13. She had to grow up quickly. And she had that role, as we know, as a mechanic in World War II, as a driver as well. The newspaper dubbed her Princess Auto Mechanic. And she gave that wonderful speech at 21 when she declared that her whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family, to which we all belong. And then when her father, King George, died at 56 in 1952, there was never a hint of why me or poor me or having to take on an unexpected role. She dedicated her life. And there are very clear lessons for us all in how she performed her role. She had a wonderful partnership with Prince Philip, and they were a formidable combination. She had that wonderful warmth and kindness. In those endless public events, she never flagged. I did see a report that said she'd actually personally met around 3 million people in her life. She was constantly on duty, but was a devoted wife, mother, with an extreme love for her family. We have lost our most important anchor. Her unwavering loyalty and the stability she brought to the nation, the Commonwealth and globally, steadfast and uplifting in times of national tragedy or trial like COVID, always positive in a message of hope. We're in this together, it will be okay and we will overcome. That wonderful sense of duty of her generation. She was a key part of the courage and dedication of the royal family during the German Blitz on London in 1940 and 41. And I think from memory, she is the last head of state who lived through World War II. She had a very profound effect in her visit to Northern Ireland in 2011. What courage that took. And in talking to other women, young and older women, many felt that profound sense of grief and loss. For those of us who have lost our mothers, in a sense it was like losing our own mothers again. That wise, strong, reliable and loving presence in our lives. Just that enormous sense of sadness and loss shared by men and women. But what a wonderful example she was of how to come to the end of your life genuinely respected. The outpouring of grief and some of the messages in the floral tributes told her story. One said, "It hurts, ma'am, it hurts so bad. We're not ready to bid you farewell. Our hearts are shattered, and a world without its platinum queen is unimaginable. You are irreplaceable. Wherever you are, never stop guiding and protecting us like you have done all these years. You were our strength and stay." So 70 years on, for those of us fortunate to have lived during her reign, I suspect we will, and we won't, ever see another monarch like her or one who served 70 years in the role. But I really hope that she knew how much she was loved. I hope she knew how much she was respected, and I hope she knew what an inspiration she's been and will be for generations to come. It has been said that all she could do, she has now done. And as has been said, ma'am, your duty is done. May she rest in eternal peace.
Thank the member for Forrest, and I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. While yesterday was a national day of mourning, today's
condolence motions have been full of the stories that each of us in this place has heard around our electorates over the past fortnight as people remember their interactions with the Queen with affection. My mum remembers as a young teenager being bussed from Temora to Wagga Wagga in 1954 to see the Queen. She was one of tens of thousands who travelled from all across the New South Wales Riverina, and she remembers it being a hot day, but she certainly got a glimpse of the Queen. Years later, I recall standing on the side of the road with my cousins at an uncle's house, waving as the Queen drove through the northern beaches. I was fortunate to have an opportunity to meet the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh during their 1986 visit to Australia, lining up with other journalists for a brief interaction and covering the Canberra leg of the royal visit. Across Macquarie, everyone has their story. In the Hawkesbury, there has been much reminiscing of the Queen's visit to St Matthew's Church in Windsor, a Francis Greenway-designed Anglican church where the Queen visited in April 1970. She reportedly examined the 1822 silver chalice and plate given to the church by King George IV. Rector Chris Jones dedicated a service to Queen Elizabeth the Sunday following her death, and along with the congregation, I was delighted to see some of the photos of that very historic visit. The Blue Mountains has had its own visit to speak of, the royal visit to Katoomba and Leura in 1954. Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh arrived on the royal train at Katoomba, which had been painted blue for the occasion. It's estimated 75,000 people lined the streets of Katoomba as the procession travelled by car to Echo Point, a spectacular setting for any civic reception. Apparently, crowds at Echo Point, where you see the Three Sisters and look across the Jamison Valley, were hanging on the outside of the safety rails and all around the cliff top, sitting on boulders so they could get a view of the royal party. Fully understanding that the visitors should be allowed time to enjoy the view, a very canny mayor let formalities run only 5 minutes. The Queen was quoted at the time saying, "My mother has often told me of the rare beauty of this mountain country, and today I have been delighted with it myself." Her mother had visited with the Duke of York in 1927, lunching at the famous Carrington Hotel, taking in the views and then heading to Jenolan Caves. The photos of the 1954 visit show the royals with Clive R. Evatt, the then State Minister for Art and Education and the brother of Doc Evatt, and with Clive's daughters, now recognised as Justice Elizabeth Evatt and Penelope Seidler. So a very prominent party. A well-loved photo locally is one of the Queen departing from Leura on the royal train. So these are some of the memories, but of course there were many more. The Queen presenting the Australian polo players with the Coronation Cup in 2005 after they defeated England. It's in the Windsor Polo Club with the winning jerseys, and the Queen is smiling, in spite of her team not having been successful. Di told me the story of how she lined up as a little girl in New Zealand to meet the Queen when she visited her school, a memory refreshed by all the discussion that there's been about the way the Queen interacted with the Commonwealth. There were memories from older Australians who could recall the death of her father and how they felt when they heard that a young woman would be the Queen. These memories were shared at the lovely Richmond St Andrew's Uniting Church service and afternoon tea earlier this week. And there have been countless gems from moments of her 16 visits to Australia. There's no doubt that after 70 years, the affection and respect for Queen Elizabeth runs deep. In the condolence book in my office, Thomas wrote, "To His Majesty King Charles III and members of the royal family, I'm deeply saddened to hear of the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. She was an inspiring presence who carried out her duties with dignity, grace and care. She's been a huge part of my life and I'll miss her dearly." There is sadness for many that this chapter in our history has closed, although clearly some mixed emotions, but it's an honour to be able to pay respect to Queen Elizabeth II.
I thank the member for Macquarie and I call the member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a great honour for me and indeed for all of us today to rise, and I rise on behalf of the Deakin community to honour Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Today, like so many days over the last fortnight, have been days of reflection and remembrance, and today is one of those days for our parliament. And whilst we've always known about the inevitability of the passing of the Queen, inevitable for all of us ultimately, this has nevertheless impacted so many Australians and indeed so many people around the world. Mr Deputy Speaker, history will uniquely and favourably remember Queen Elizabeth II. Like most Australians, I've known no other monarch in my life, which in a rapidly changing world has been a reassuring and immovable touchstone, particularly with change seemingly getting more rapid by the year. Her Majesty's also been a thread that has woven generations of Australian families together, including mine. And I've got no doubt that her steady presence has supported so many Australians, not just as individuals, but also supported our confident national psyche. Most importantly for me, Mr Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty embodied servant leadership, something that's been mentioned a lot today. And when she said in her speech on her 21st birthday in 1947 that, I quote, "I declare before you all that my life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong," she set a lofty ambition, one which she truly meant and lived up to. She also importantly led by example. And in my view, there's no better illustration than when the then Princess Elizabeth in 1944 joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which was the women's branch of the British Army, when she became eligible on her 18th birthday. At that time, unmarried women under 30 had to join the armed forces or work on the land or in industry, and Princess Elizabeth enthusiastically enlisted and was later promoted to junior commander, which is the equivalent of a captain. And who, of course, could ever forget the sight of Her Majesty sitting silently alone in her grief at the funeral of her late husband, Prince Philip. This was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and whatever one's views of the rules that were imposed at that time, seeing the Queen following the same rules as all others, not seeking any form of preferential treatment, is a testament to her leadership by example. There's also no doubt that Her Majesty lived by many timeless values. She seemed unaffected by the fads or trends of the day, and whilst she always reflected the inevitable evolution of the modern world and the Commonwealth, she never succumbed to the all-too-modern pressure of ditching those values which have stood the test of time. Indeed, her faith, which she famously described as one of the three pillars of her life, along with family and friends, remained strong throughout her life. Her words in the 2014 Queen's Christmas message said it best, in my view, and I quote, "For me, the life of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, whose birth we celebrate today, is an inspiration and an anchor in my life, a role model of reconciliation and forgiveness. He stretched out his hands in love, acceptance and healing. Christ's example has taught me to seek to respect and value all people of whatever faith or none." For millions of Australians, including myself, we see in this concise statement a reflection of our own values and motivations, which was always comforting to know underpinned Her Majesty's life. I must say, Mr Deputy Speaker, like so many in this House, I've been struck by the outpouring of well wishes from members of the Deakin electorate, many of whom, many hundreds indeed, have contributed to our condolence book. Some of these messages have read the following. Lisa from North Ringwood. "Dear Your Majesty Queen, we thank you for setting a perfect example for people. Thank you for everything you did. We will always love and remember you. May your soul rest in peace." Or Marlene from Vermont. "Her Majesty, you've been an inspiration for women worldwide, and your hard-working ethic is a lesson for us all. Thank you for being a guiding light for your amazing 70-year reign. Rest peacefully, your work is done." Or Jing from Ringwood. "We thank God for Queen Elizabeth II's life and witness to Jesus Christ and her love and care of the people of the Commonwealth. We are thankful for her wisdom and wise counsel and duty to the end. And so I conclude by turning to the book of Matthew and saying, Your Majesty, well done, good and faithful servant. Your duty is done. May you rest in eternal peace.
Thank the member for Deakin. I call the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, the House meets today to mark the end of an era, the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the end of her historic reign. I convey my condolences to Her Majesty's family and friends for their deep personal loss of an obviously dearly loved matriarch. Death is a difficult thing for human beings to grapple with at the best of times, but it must be particularly hard to grapple with as public attention intrudes onto personal grief. And watching these public proceedings in the United Kingdom following her death, I was reminded by that great US historian, Barbara Tuchman's account in The Guns of August of the funeral procession of Her Majesty's great-grandfather, King Edward VII, in 1910. This was, Tuchman noted, quote, the greatest assemblage of royalty and rank ever gathered in one place, and amongst the representatives of the 70 nations in attendance, there were 9 kings, 5 heirs apparent, 40 imperial or royal highnesses, 7 queens and, quote, a scattering of special ambassadors from uncrowned countries. Tuchman wrote that, quote, the muffled tongue of Big Ben told 9 by the clock as the cortege left the palace, but on history's clock it was sunset, and the sun of the old world was setting on in a dying blaze of splendour never to be seen again. It did mark the end of an era. The arrival of the First World War in Europe soon after this spectacle radically changed the continent and the world. And as Her Majesty's funeral cortege made its way through London 112 years later, Big Ben tolled on a world radically changed again. And while the spectre of war has once again returned to the continent, much else has changed again during the 70 years since the Queen was coronated at Westminster Abbey. When Her Majesty the Queen was coronated in June 1953, the world was just starting to recover from the damages and the bloodshed of World War II. Australia looked very different than it does today. 3/4 of Australia's then population of 9 million people turned out to see her first tour of Australia. It was the equivalent of nearly 19 million Australians turning out to see her today. Unimaginable. It was a different time. It was just 4 years before her coronation that the Chifley government passed the Nationality and Citizenship Act, and that anyone born or naturalised in Australia became an Australian citizen rather than a British subject. At the time of Australia's first citizenship ceremony, where 7 European men from across the nation received Australian citizenship, 9 out of 10 Australians were born locally, and people from the United Kingdom comprised more than half of our limited migrant stock. The White Australia policy in operation since Federation would not start to be substantially unwound until 1966 and would not be completely dismantled until the Whitlam government. Today, around 30% of people living in Australia were born overseas, and only 15% of which were born in the United Kingdom. First Nations people didn't have a universal right to vote in Australian federal elections until nearly 10 years after Her Majesty ascended the throne in 1962. It would be another 30 years after that before the High Court overturned the legal fiction of terra nullius and recognised the pre-colonial land interests of First Nations Australians in the 1992 Mabo decision. We will soon sow further change as our nation pursues the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Voice, Treaty and Truth. The collective identity of those living in this country has been constantly evolving through the actions of its changing inhabitants for centuries. We have changed so much for the better. But while so much has changed, Her Majesty remained. As Prime Minister Albanese has said, Her Majesty was a rare and reassuring constant amidst rapid change. We've seen this week the way that national symbols matter, how powerful they can be. We've seen in the way so many people in the United Kingdom flocked to pay tribute to the passing of their monarch and the way their country has united in this moment. In Australia, Her Majesty was held in high personal regard by many Australians. She took on the throne at just 25 years of age and in the unenviable role as a constitutional monarch. She was dedicated to duty as she conceived it. She sought to leave the institutions she worked within better than the shape that she inherited them. This is an example that all of us in this place can learn from. The Australian public's continuing high regard for Her Majesty in the face of the dramatic change our nation has experienced over the last 70 years is extraordinary and a tribute to her service, and also a source of wry frustration for Republicans like myself. Republicans could only express our opposition to the continuance of the institution of hereditary monarchy in Australia, not to Her Majesty's extraordinary life of service. She was a one-of-a-kind, and her passing marks the end of an era. May she rest in peace.
Thank the member for Gellibrand. I call the member for Lynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's with the deepest feelings of sadness that I rise to express my regret at the passing of our Queen, our late Queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And so many of my constituents from the Lion electorate have similar thoughts and would like that expressed in this chamber. Queen Elizabeth II was an amazing lady, monarch, head of the Church of England and Scotland, and also a titular leader and a constant in multiple generations of Australians' lives. She has been a beacon of stability, not just for the United Kingdom, but she's been an exemplary international leader and source of unity for the whole Commonwealth and for our nation during her 70 years of faithful service to us. She's been wise counsel to many Australian Prime Ministers, in fact 16 of them, and 179 Prime Ministers around the Commonwealth. She has been through wars, other conflicts, natural disasters, periods of rapid social change, political upheavals, boom and bust and depression, and she has been a source of reassurance to people around the world, but particularly in Australia during that time. Whether it was floods or droughts or bushfires or other natural disasters, she always kept kindly interest and genuine interest in all of us. One of my earliest memories of the Queen was her visit to Australia in 1963. As a 5-year-old, she visited Canberra but also visited nearby Queanbeyan. She did return many times when I saw her at the Bicentennial in Sydney at the Opera House, and during my 2 years working in the United Kingdom. Living and working in London was a treat and an experience I'll never forget, but one of the highlights was to be invited to attend Royal Ascot and be in the royal enclosure, dressed up in a morning suit and a top hat and all, at the pleasure of Her Majesty. Having enjoyed many days at the races, that would have to go down as even better than a Melbourne Cup, which I haven't even got to yet. But anyhow, the 4 occasions I was sworn in as a minister, I was very proud to take the oath declaring my allegiance to the Crown. And I made sure during COVID, when we couldn't do it in this chamber, that we had the portrait of Her Majesty behind me and seen on the Microsoft Teams meeting. Our nation and the whole of Lion mourn her passing, and I would like to formally express mine and my electorate's deepest sympathies and condolences to King Charles and the whole royal family. As we mourn her loss, we welcome King Charles III to the Crown, and I'm sure he's been trained and learned from the very best. It's an opportune time for us to reflect on the constitutional monarchy that we have inherited from the United Kingdom, and seeing all the other systems of government around the world, the troubles with republics or various forms of government, with ultimate and supreme power vested in one elected official that is essentially a political role, you can see the benefits of having a constitutional monarchy. Many in this chamber and around the world have a problem with a monarch being a hereditary position. But the fact that it's not political, it's above the fray, and it is generally a well-educated monarch these days, that is the essentially good thing about a constitutional monarchy. The Constitution has defined the powers of government in the Parliament, the ministers and the courts, and we have the benefit of things that the United Kingdom went through in the 1600s. We're the beneficiary of all the turmoil that they went through, and many countries in the Commonwealth are similar beneficiaries. Socrates, that Greek philosopher who gets mentioned many times, would be really proud of what Queen Elizabeth II turned out to be. When you see her personal musings and her published words of condolence, advice, encouragement and analysis on the big things in life in her public speeches, she really was a philosopher queen. And it's only when you don't have something that you really notice its loss. So we all mourn her passing, thank her for her service, and God save the King.
I thank the member for Lyne, and I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. I rise to say a few words on behalf of the constituents of my electorate, the electorate of Bendigo. Like many, I was saddened to hear of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, who reigned as Australia's head of state for more than 70 years. This condolence motion for Her Majesty, moved by the Prime Minister, is a moment for this place to mark the passing of our nation's head of state. It is custom and protocol that we do. It signals the end of the 14 days, official days of mourning. At 96, her passing was not a surprise. She had lived a good life, a good innings, as they say, just short of a ton. But it still is a sad time for many, particularly her family. The Queen was a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother. She will be remembered for being a monarch who witnessed and influenced the trajectory of modern history. I want to thank the constituents of my electorate who took the time to come into my office to leave a message of condolence. These messages will be collated and sent to Buckingham Palace with other messages from around the country. The messages will also be archived by the Commonwealth and may be displayed in national institutions to form a lasting record of this moment in our history. In the past fortnight, there have been many who have also shared their reflections of Her Majesty on social media, local media and social gatherings. Many have said things such as, "She's the only Queen I've ever known. It is the end of an era." A life of service and duty. A kind lady with a generous smile. She was like my grandmother. And that's a comment that we've heard quite a few times today, and her passing just reminded me of my own personal loss. It was a life of privilege. She was the Queen. But with that privilege came great responsibility and great scrutiny. At the young age of 25, she became the head of our Commonwealth, and in many times was the only woman in those early days to stand in a room of leaders. Today, if she stood in that same room, some things have changed, but there are still lots of men standing. We are still short of that goal of 50-50. The scrutiny that she lived through. There are many that would be on the same level of scrutiny that she experienced. Every word, every tour, every speech scrutinised. Every time a family member said something or did something wrong, it was quite often reflected on the Queen. Yes, in public life we do expect scrutiny, but the scrutiny that the Queen went through was unprecedented. Like many have reflected, the Queen did visit Bendigo, and yes, it was in 1954. She spent about 80 minutes in the town and was greeted by over 9,000 children in the Upper Reserve, renamed Queen Elizabeth Oval, the QEO, after her visit. My partner's mother, Gail, was one of the 9,000 children that stood proudly on the ground waving her Aussie flag. I don't have any royal memories, but my favourite Queen moment was probably one of her most recent, her cameo with Paddington Bear. What a lovely moment to leave her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren and children everywhere. I do think it's important that we acknowledge that for some Australians this period of mourning has been challenging, and for some they're indifferent. And I think that's okay. Australia today is a very different country to when the Queen was first crowned our sovereign. Today we are many cultures and histories woven together to make the modern Australian story. At yesterday's National Memorial Service in the Great Hall, I deeply admired the generosity and spirit of our First Nations elders who not only attended but participated in the service. And it's perhaps the words of Queen Elizabeth II that really reflect that generosity. It is worth remembering that it is often the small steps and not the giant leaps that bring about the most lasting change. The Queen was known for her words. On behalf of the constituents of my electorate, I'd like to send the condolences to the entire family. May she rest in eternal peace.
I thank the member for Bendigo and I call the member for Dawson.
Deputy Speaker, on behalf of my electorate of Dawson, I stand today to acknowledge and commemorate the life and leadership of the late Queen Elizabeth II, who on the 8th of September passed away peacefully at her Balmoral home at the age of 96. When Her Majesty acceded to the throne in 1952, aged just 25, her life changed overnight, from that young naval wife and mother to a busy head of state. She was to become known as a symbol of stability and strength, an important figurehead for the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, during both times of crisis and of celebration. Throughout the Queen's 70-year reign, she appointed 15 UK Prime Ministers. 16 Australian Prime Ministers have served during her historic reign. She led the Commonwealth through many difficult times, with the most recent being the COVID-19 pandemic. The Queen's husband, Prince Philip, was a constant strength by her side. Her lifelong companion of 73 years passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 99 in April 2021. We all saw Her Majesty sitting alone and bereaved in St George's Chapel. The Queen was the only reigning monarch to visit Australia, where she travelled to our nation a total of 16 times. As the member of Dawson, it was unique to hear that she had visited Mackay on more than one occasion. She travelled up our way in 1954, only months after she was crowned, and again in 1970. Many Dawson residents have told their stories at the time they got to meet our Queen. She famously said, following her visit to Mackay, that she left with a deeper understanding of North Queensland, its people and their way of life. Now, Deputy Speaker, I've got a metaphor here that I think truly captures what Queen Elizabeth meant to us. If Australia is a house, then Queen Elizabeth was the concrete slab that was our foundation. It was not going anywhere. It didn't matter what was thrown at the house, because no matter what, it was locked into that slab. And there was no way that slab was moving. The slab never cracks, and it never breaks. It does not matter what happens to the house. Pieces can fall off, it can sway in the breeze, but that concrete slab held it together. Whenever the house felt like it was going to fall down, or that it wasn't going to be as strong as it could be, it could always rely on that slab to be just as stable as when it was first poured. Deputy Speaker, Queen Elizabeth was that concrete slab. She was that stable rock that kept us strong through thick and thin. We could always rely on her. I would like to pass on. She was a kind, caring and compassionate leader, a daughter, sister, auntie, mother, grandmother and great-grandmother, whom everyone respected. I'd like to acknowledge the many people who have ordered a portrait of the Queen. I'd also like to thank the many who have come into my office to leave a message of condolence. I will make sure that these messages are passed on. This outpour of both grief and support demonstrates how highly regarded the late Queen was. and how her legacy will stay with us. I would like to pass on just one of those messages from Dawson. Mrs Jessie McCarthy of North Mackay says, "Thank you for your service to the Commonwealth. Your commitment, loyalty with charm and dedication will always be remembered. You are an amazing example to us all." Deputy Speaker, it is a sad time for the world, a time where we can all reflect. We really are the lucky country, and we're so lucky to have had a Queen that have brought out the best of us. May her inspirational life of service and sacrifice, fortitude and humility, grace and generosity, forgiveness and empathy be remembered throughout the history of our nation. Rest in peace, O gracious lady. Long live the King.
Thank the member for Dawson, and I call the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the electorate of Adelaide, I too rise to acknowledge the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and at the sad and momentous occasion that has touched so many people. My electorate office has been inundated with calls, people wanting portraits, wanting to express their dismay, or simply looking to share their thoughts, or coming in to sign the condolence book that we've set up in the reception area. Queen Elizabeth meant many things to many people, but regardless of what role the Queen may have played in individual lives, there is no doubt that this marks the end of a very significant era. Queen Elizabeth II was the UK's and the Commonwealth's longest-serving monarch. She died peacefully at Balmoral, where she had spent most of the summer and many, many summers in the past. She was aged 96 and she reigned for 70 amazing years. And during her reign, she witnessed enormous social change. I think all people, regardless of their political persuasion, cannot but admire the life of Queen Elizabeth II. She was a constant in our lives. And her loss has been profoundly felt around the world. Queen Elizabeth II will be remembered for her tireless sense of duty, and who can forget the image of her as she swore in the new UK Prime Minister just days before she passed away. She was frail but ever present. As Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said, she embodied a timeless decency and enduring calm. For over 7 decades, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a rare constant in our lives amidst continuous rapid change. The Queen visited Australia 16 times during her reign, and with her first tour in 1954 coming just 8 months after her coronation, she visited South Australia and Adelaide 7 of those times, and her last visit was in 2002. Deputy Speaker, since her death, we've heard countless people recall their memories of the Queen, what she meant to them and what an important role she played in their lives. And my own recollection of the Queen was on 2 occasions, the first being in 1963 when I had just started school, and being at Cowndilla Primary, which was closest to the airport. When the Queen arrived, they'd lined us up with Australian flags to wave for the Queen as she drove past. And I still have that memory of what I remember was a big car driving past, and that memory has stayed with me forever and a day. The second occasion was here in this Parliament House in 2006, when the Queen was visiting for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And we had a parliamentary dinner in the Great Hall in honour of the Queen. And we all that were there that night all recall a great speech that she gave, mainly her main topic being our First Nations people. So many people, Deputy Speaker, the Queen was a symbol of warmth and hard-working dedication. We also warmly welcome King Charles III, who has, like his mother, played an important part in our shared history. And there will be a time to celebrate the new King, and there will be a time for reflection on what this new era means. But first, we bid farewell to Queen Elizabeth II. For all she may represent in the minds of people all around the world, we shouldn't forget that she was also a wife, a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother. And regardless of how deeply her death is felt around the world, her family is grieving their own personal loss. We acknowledge this with compassion and sadness. Veil Queen Elizabeth II, after a lifetime of service, may she now rest in peace.
I thank the member for Adelaide and I call the member for Moncrieff.
The death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II sent shockwaves across the globe and across our nation. The Queen was larger than life, and for many of us, she was the only monarch we've ever known. Elizabeth II loved Australia, visiting our shores 16 times, and we loved her deeply in return. Many Australians from my generation had a fondness for Her Majesty like that of a grandmother figure. We heard her voice through the radio, saw her face on coins, stamps and currency, and watched her deliver her Christmas message every year. The Queen who was never meant to be, but through whose circumstance stepped up to lead and to unite. For 7 decades, her graciousness ruled, modernising monarchy with a steady hand and heart. Elizabeth reigned from the industrial age to the internet age, against a backdrop of cultural and political change. Her Majesty stewarded 15 UK Prime Ministers from Churchill to Truss and 16 Australian Prime Ministers from Menzies to Morrison. Across parties, across parliaments, through wars and recessions, good times and bad, always a constant bright light with comforting and reassuring words. Her personality captured hearts of millions around the world. Since the news of her death, photos, videos and stories of her have circled the globe. Deeply personal moments of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, stories of her time during World War II, and of course tea with Paddington Bear and at the London Olympics with 007. Elizabeth II had a calm demeanour, a wicked sense of humour, an incredible love for her country, Commonwealth, family, corgis, and of course all things equine. A favourite insight was when Her Majesty wore a brooch, gifted to her by Barack Obama during an audience with Donald Trump. Such was the humour always on display for those who chose to look closely. I spent the first 8 years of my life growing up in a satellite city named after Her Majesty to the north of Adelaide, Elizabeth. Later, I recall the royal visit in October 1981 when I was just 14 and in Year 8. I walked with my high school peers to the main North Road to see and honour our Queen and her Prince as they passed by in their black Rolls Royce. 2,000 children of Gawler High School waved ferociously with our Australian flags to welcome her to our town. Many will remember how we lined the road for kilometres for just one glimpse and a royal wave. My late mother Barbara spoke of her fond memories at the tender age of 8 in England in 1953, watching the Queen's coronation on the single television in the cul-de-sac in Roworth Road in Middlesbrough, and her big sister June, who received a coronation book when she was selected by her school to wave a flag and in turn receive a royal wave, as I did 28 years later. Generations of Australians have cherished memories of Her Majesty, including those who immigrated here, including my mother's family, the Aldersons. Elizabeth II visited the Gold Coast on one occasion, in March 1963, where she attended a Royal Surf Carnival as patron of the Queensland Surf Lifesaving Association. Some may have caught a glimpse or royal wave during that visit too, but many Moncrieff constituents have filled the pages of our condolence book with heartfelt messages to the Queen and to the royal family, including Nicholas Hewitt, an Aussie digger, Warrant Officer Class 2, who wrote, "To Her Majesty the Queen, Ma'am, it has been an honour and privilege to have served you. May you rest in peace. To Elizabeth II, your service and dedication to making Britain, the Commonwealth and the world a better place is your legacy. As we look to the future, we know King Charles III will continue to build on your commitment to public service, uphold your values and continue your work. On behalf of the good people of Moncrieff and indeed the community of Elizabeth, I offer my deepest condolences to all members of the royal family. May you rest peacefully with your beloved Philip. Thank you for all you did for the nations of the Commonwealth."
I thank the member for Moncrieff and I call the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to pay tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and to pass on the condolences of the community of Pearce. We not only grieve the loss of a much-loved Queen who was the epitome of loyalty, strength and dignity, who dedicated her life to service, we also celebrate what was an historic reign of 70 years. Indeed, our Queen was a constant reassurance and comfort in an era of change, Like many in my electorate of Pearce in WA, one of the fastest and largest growing communities in Western Australia, with 42% of residents born overseas, Queen Elizabeth was the only monarch we have known and who was also much loved. In fact, many members of my community, there's a constant stream signing the condolences book in my office, and there are many requests for portraits of the Queen. In 1947, aged 21, Princess Elizabeth, in a radio broadcast whilst on an official tour of South Africa with her parents and sister Margaret, stated, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." In 1952, at 25 years of age, the Princess became Queen Elizabeth II, and 70 years later, those words remain true, reflecting a lifetime of loyal service. During that same broadcast, the Princess spoke about hope as the world sought to recover following the Second World War, stating, "If we all go forward together with an unwavering faith, a high courage and a quiet heart, we shall be able to make of this ancient Commonwealth, which we all love so dearly, an even grander thing, more free, more prosperous, more happy, and a more powerful influence for good in the world." She then went on to say, to accomplish that, we must give nothing less than the whole of ourselves. Words of wisdom indeed, and over the course of Her Majesty's reign, the Commonwealth grew from 7 nations to 56 members, representing 2.5 billion people. Next to me is my father's Grenadier Guard forage hat. My granddad, great-uncle's dad and uncle all served in the military. However, my dad chose the Grenadier Guards in which to serve. I also have a cross-stitch that my mum, as a young engaged woman, created. She added 1 stitch per day that her fiancé was away on official duty with the Grenadier Guards. And the result now is a beautiful cross-stitch of a Grenadier Guard proudly wearing his bearskin. During my childhood, very little was said about my dad's military career and his time in the SAS Parachute Corps, but I remember asking him why he joined the Grenadier Guards. His answer was swift and simple. He turned his full attention to me and without hesitation said, "To serve and protect the Queen." I remember the emotion in his eyes. I remember every fibre of my being reacting to the deep-seated, genuine reaction that I had just witnessed. It was spontaneous and it was genuine. It was a reaction that I vividly recalled just a few days ago, whilst watching, like many others in this place and around the world, the Queen's state funeral. Her Majesty's Royal Military Procession did her proud. It was a true reflection of the respect, love and loyalty each individual serviceman and servicewoman had for their Queen, and this resonated right around the world. Having attended official Buckingham Palace events with my parents as a young girl, I saw for myself how much the Queen enjoyed meeting people and talking with them, easily putting everybody at ease with her caring demeanour. Her Majesty would not be rushed by officials and often had those to whom she was talking to spontaneously burst out laughing by a comment she had made. Without doubt, the Queen most certainly did have a good sense of humour. Her Majesty's devotion and service to her family, her nation and the Commonwealth was unparalleled, and I'm so very thankful to have borne witness to how much she cared genuinely about others. Our Queen was a loving wife, mother, auntie, granny, great-auntie, friend and ruler, and did her country proud. Leaders from all corners of the world attended the state funeral to pay respects. It was respect, well and truly earned and deserved. We all witnessed the outpouring of love and emotion expressed through community connection and presence. To King Charles, members of the royal family and her staff members, our thoughts and prayers are with you as you grieve your loss, and may Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II rest in eternal peace, reunited with her beloved husband. Strength and stay, Prince Philip. Thank you.
Thank the member for Pearce, and I call the member for Casey.
Deputy Speaker, I rise on behalf of the people of Casey to honour our late sovereign, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. During her reign, the Queen was a guiding light for us all. Following her coronation in 1953, our Queen said, "I have in sincerity pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Throughout all my life and with all my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your trust. There is no doubt that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II lived up to her pledge during her 70-year reign. The Queen had a deep understanding and commitment to her responsibilities and duty for her country, her Commonwealth, but most of all, her people. And we will miss her steadfast leadership, her gentle guiding hand and her love, because she did not lead just through words, but with her actions. The Queen had a deep affection for Australia, visiting us 16 times during her reign, and like many here, she visited Casey in 1954 during her first royal tour. She was greeted by 20,000 locals in Lilydale who climbed trees and fences just to catch a glimpse of their young Queen. The crowd sang "God Save the Queen" and waved 5,000 souvenir flags. Even though the Queen only stayed for 15 minutes, the local paper termed the visit a truly momentous occasion for Lilydale, one that the thousands of old and young will never forget. The Queen and Duke of Edinburgh went on to spend 2 nights at O'Shanassy Chalet, east of Warburton, which served as one of the residences of the Queen and Duke during the tour. I was fortunate to attend a memorial service for the late Queen at Yarra Glen Anglican Church last Sunday. One of the speakers was Noel, who saw the Queen in 1954 and had brought with him the 2 flags that he waved on the day. It was touching to see and hear the emotion in Noel's voice and face as he described the visit and how much seeing the Queen, even fleetingly, meant to him. It was a poignant reminder of the place the Queen held in so many hearts. Neil Stoney from Wiriolic told of how, as a young lad, he galloped at full speed on his horse Norrie alongside the train carrying Her Majesty to Warburton that day. As he rode, he waved to the Queen, and to his delight, she came out onto the carriage observation deck and waved back. He often reflects on this experience and hopes she enjoyed his jubilation and horsemanship that day. Or Betty McGeorge, a Casey local celebrating her 90th birthday this week, who saw the coronation of the Queen 70 years ago as the dawn of a new era. Following the horrendous Black Saturday bushfires in 2009 that impacted many in Casey, the Queen sent a message to all Victorians. She said she was shocked and saddened to learn of the terrible toll being exacted by the fires this weekend, and sent heartfelt condolences to the families of all those who have died and deep sympathies to the many that have lost their homes in this disaster. The royal family then made a generous donation to the Bushfire Fund, with the Queen requesting daily updates about the recovery from the Premier's office. After 3 months of regular updates to the palace, the Premier decided to cease sending them as they were entering the recovery phase, and he assumed the Queen would not wish to continue receiving them so frequently. The Queen quickly sent a message. Her Majesty would be keen to continue with the daily briefings. Her interest and empathy meant a lot to our community. Her care and love helped our community to grieve, recover and rebuild. The Queen deeply understood her responsibility as a leader and set an example for all of us to emulate in our lives. She put the duty to her people above her own personal needs. She epitomised servant leadership. She truly was worthy of our trust. She gave us her heart and her devotion for her entire life, and we are thankful. Valet Queen Elizabeth II, God save the King.
I thank the member for Casey, and I call the member for Cornwall.
Acting Deputy Speaker, Queen Elizabeth began her reign as a very young woman, unexpectedly and filled with many, many challenges. And yet, as her 70-year reign has proven, Elizabeth II stood firmly in the place she was given, and from there she went on to move the world, redefining and modernising the British monarchy and bringing together the Commonwealth of Nations that she was so devoted to, earning along the way the love, admiration and respect of her subjects, of leaders and of people across the world. In the course of her 70-year reign, and certainly in the aftermath of her death, she has been praised for her unwavering sense of commitment to duty, for being steadfast and resolute in her reign, praised for her dignity and stoicism, her wisdom and values, admired and respected for the many roles she performed, firstly as the Queen, the defender of her faith, and then as a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a grandmother and a great-grandmother, and a tradie also, Acting Deputy Speaker. It's well known that she was a car mechanic servicing army trucks during World War II, and I'd say that she'd be a great model today for encouraging young women to actually go into the trade and help us deal with our skill shortages that we're enduring at this moment. Deputy Speaker, I migrated to Australia in 1963, and as a child of migrants, or New Australians as we were called, I remember my primary school years throughout the 60s were all very much about understanding and learning to become an Australian. Naturally, I had to learn the English language, and in our school hall at Brunswick South Primary School, we would sing our national anthem, God Save the Queen, every morning, and we would listen to the BBC once a week. We traded in pennies, shillings and pounds, and Queen Elizabeth was the essential symbol upon which I was building my understanding of what being an Australian was. In fact, at that time, post-Second World War migrants, Australia built its integration and new Australian identity around the persona of the Queen as our head of state, and in acquiring citizenship in those days, it was, as my late father said, signing up to the Queen. I reflected on this when I visited the grade 5 and 6 students of Meadows Primary School in my electorate on the Friday morning after we'd heard the news of the Queen's passing. I shared my primary school memories with the students so that they could understand the significance of Queen Elizabeth to my generation almost 6 decades ago, because they too, being children of migrants and refugees, they too are developing a sense of being Australian and developing their own Australian identity, but in a different era, one in which, as Australians, we have grown and matured, understanding ourselves as being a nation of early settlers, migrants and refugees with an Indigenous inheritance of our first people who we continue to strive to appropriately recognise and reconcile with. My dear friend Mary Elizabeth Corwell has spoken to me about the many times that she met the Queen. In fact, during the Royal Tour of 1963, she accompanied her father, the late Arthur Corwell, who was federal leader of the opposition at the time and who had also been Australia's first migration minister, to a dinner at Yarralumna. She recalls that the Queen conformed to the convention of withdrawing with the women from dinner after dessert that allowed the men to enjoy port, cigars and conversation. Mary Elizabeth recalls that the Queen had to initiate all conversation and that she was, and I quote, highly intelligent, knowledgeable and friendly, and that throughout her reign the Queen adjusted to the changing mores of society that enabled the monarchy to become more identified with the wider community." Unquote. Deputy Speaker, my constituent Nayana Badari told me that, putting aside the turbulent history associated with India's independence, she said, and I quote, "I liked Queen Elizabeth II as a woman who served the community and her family in such a dignified manner." And another constituent, Ali, who migrated from Turkey in the late 60s, just after the White Australia policy was dismantled, said to me emphatically, "I liked her very much. She was a strong leader. There are not many leaders like her." Deputy Speaker, I met the Queen here in Parliament House during her visit in 2011. As she moved through the crowd in the Great Hall, she did so effortlessly, with such grace and warmth. I remember fondly sharing small talk with the late Prince Philip. It was something along the lines of our shared Greek heritage. To see them both together gave you a full understanding and appreciation of their relationship, their teamwork. They were totally in sync with one another, and it was clear why she referred to him as her strength and stay. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the people of Cornwall, I extend my condolences to King Charles III and the royal family. Long live the King, and may she rest in peace.
I thank the member for Cornwall, and I call the member for Flynn.
Mr Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has lived an extraordinary life which touched so many. She was our sovereign, as she was for other nations of the Commonwealth spread across the world, a monarch who ruled with empathy and wisdom, both innate and gained from almost a century of life and experience. At just 25, as a young wife and mother of two, she became a mother to a nation and to the Commonwealth of Nations around the globe. She became the Queen. Following her coronation on the 2nd of June 1953, our Queen said, "I have, in sincerity, pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Throughout all my life and with all my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your trust." Not only did our Queen earn our trust, but she also won our admiration. In serving the people marvelled at her unflagging service. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II lived throughout the pivotal events of the 20th and 21st centuries: wars and conflicts, depression and recession, the end of an empire and decolonisation, the race to the moon and the attainment of civil rights, the brilliance of the Olympic Games and the barbarity of terrorism. During the Second World War, at just age 19, Princess Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. After joining, she trained as a driver and a mechanic, with the rank of second subaltern. 5 months later, she was promoted to junior commander, which was the equivalent of captain. Though the world changed around her, she remained steadfast in her devotion to God, her country and the Commonwealth. Madam Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II visited Australia on 16 separate occasions between 1954 and 2011, with her reign spanning 16 separate Australian Prime Ministers. The Queen and Prince Philip visited Rockhampton on March 15, 1954, following a major flood. The visit helped motivate the city and clean up after the Fitzroy River burst its banks and devastated the community. She visited every state and territory and opened our new Parliament House and the Sydney Opera House, and attended the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane and Melbourne. Wherever she went, crowds choked the streets, cheering, clapping and waving flags to express their admiration. Despite her royalty, she possessed extraordinary humility, greeting all those she met with courtesy, treating them as equals and offering an attentive ear. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth again exemplified the optimism, poise and stoicism which she carried throughout her life, and which inspired many. She told the people of the United Kingdom via broadcast, "We will succeed, better days will return, we will meet again." May our memories of our dear Queen inspire the very best in us. Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Flynn electorate, I offer heartfelt condolences to the royal family and to the people of the United Kingdom and to the Commonwealth. Many Flynn residents have contacted both my Gladstone and Emerald offices with requests for portrait of the late Queen and have signed the condolence books to pay their respects. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, Queen Elizabeth lived a life of service for her country and the Commonwealth. Above all, she was a beloved mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. Madam Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was the Everest on the mountain range of achievement. Her loyalty, selfless devotion, humility, honour and wisdom are unparalleled, and we will not see the like of it again in our lifetime. On behalf of the Flynn electorate, we offer our respectful condolences to the royal family. Ave, Acque, Valet. Hail and farewell, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, 1926-2022.
I thank the member for Flynn. I call the member for Macon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are moments and events in our lives that remain unforgettable and can never be replicated. Such has been the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the proclamation of Prince Charles as King Charles III. For the past 2 weeks, people around the world were captivated by the unparalleled public display of tradition, protocol, regalia, sombre parades and extraordinary public display of gratitude and admiration. Throughout it all, the world witnessed Great Britain at its best. With absolute perfection and precision, each step of the way, the endless formalities and ceremonies, which included the participation of a wide cross-section of British society, including the royal family, military and police sectors, Scottish bagpipes, religious ceremonies, angelic choirs and everyday British people, were all meticulously planned and superbly executed. After 2 weeks of extreme commentary, glowing tributes and personal anecdotes, There is little left to say that has not been said, but I will share some brief observations about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and events of recent days. The public fascination with protocol and regalia suggests to me that these practices still serve an important function in society and that there is a silent public craving for ceremonial conventions. In a world where there is growing indifference to civic standards of behaviour, protocols do not merely reflect heritage and historical traditions, but they express public standards, pride, tradition and appreciation. Protocols observed so well by Queen Elizabeth. Protocols also reflect an orderly society that values and the values which guide that order. Importantly, protocol brings dignity to the person or the occasion. The protocols and ceremonies in response to the passing of Queen Elizabeth, including here in Australia and in this Parliament, speak so clearly to how highly and how widely she was regarded. Notwithstanding their special status in society, members of the royal family have normal human emotions as they deal with both their personal and public lives. Watching Queen Elizabeth's family members on ceremonial parade on the day of her funeral and on the days leading up to it, with media and public eyes scrutinising their every move, brought home the reality that these were real people grieving the loss of a person very dear to their heart. To all of them, on behalf of the people of Macon and myself, I offer my sincere condolences. More than anyone else I know of, for 70 years Queen Elizabeth lived under that intense spotlight, never able to let her guard down whilst in public, yet to my knowledge, not once did she falter. It was her persona and her decency, which others have spoken so extensively about, that brought dignity and honour not just to herself but to the entire British monarchy. Since her crowning in 1952, South Australians have had an enduring fondness for Queen Elizabeth. The City of Elizabeth and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Adelaide's western suburbs, and I note the member for Spencer was here, mentioned them earlier on in his address, were both established in the years immediately following her coronation and named in her honour, ensuring that her name will live on in South Australia. A quotation from Roman philosopher Cicero perhaps best sums up the life of Queen Elizabeth II, and I quote, "The life of the dead is placed in the memory of the living." End of quote. The life of Queen Elizabeth II has been affectionately placed in the memories of countless people throughout the world. That is, I believe, the greatest honour that any person can receive. Queen Elizabeth II now lies in Windsor Castle alongside her husband, Prince Philip, her father, King George VI, and her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, where now she can rest in peace.
Thank the member for Macon, and I call the member for Petrie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On February 6, 1952, at the age of only 25, Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was pronounced Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II after the passing of her father, King George VI, and what followed was 70 years, 7 decades of service, strength and steadfast devotion to Australia, the Commonwealth and to her people throughout. She bravely led our world through the rapidly evolving eras of the 20th and 21st centuries. Her Majesty was more than a figurehead of the monarchy. Behind the crown was a woman with a sense of humour who loved her family and her country. Her public appearances were often noted by brightly coloured ensembles. She rode horses, owned thoroughbreds, raced pigeons and loved her corgis. I have personally been inspired by her leadership, and every day since I first stood in this House and publicly declared my oath of allegiance, and previously as a parliamentary secretary in the 46th Parliament, that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Australia, so help me God. I have endeavoured to faithfully serve the people of Australia as Her Majesty herself so remarkably exemplified. Only 2 days prior to her passing, Her Majesty was still fulfilling her duties by inviting the United Kingdom's new Prime Minister, the Honourable Liz Truss, to form a government. What an example of lifelong service. The Queen knew that a life of public service was not for the faint-hearted. In 1945, Her Majesty joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service during the Second World War, becoming the first female royal to join the armed services as a full-time active member. There, she was taught to service army trucks, which undoubtedly developed a love for cars, in particular Land Rovers, that would continue throughout her long life. Her relationship with the armed forces was deeply personal. She was the daughter, wife and mother of naval officers. She understood better than most the burdens and the glory of a life in service. Her Majesty knew how to serve others because she first served God. Her Christian faith was evident in her good works, contributing to hundreds of charities in her lifetime. She believed in peace and reconciliation with all people, no matter what race, religion, gender or social status. She believed wholeheartedly in Jesus Christ's teaching of forgiveness and love. In one of Her Majesty's famous Christmas broadcasts, she said, "Each day is a new beginning. I know that the only way to live my life is to try to do what is right, to take the long view, to give of my best in all that the day brings, and to put my trust in God." The pages of Her Majesty's condolence book I had in my office was quickly filled with messages of reflection, hope and love for our beloved Queen and the royal family. I'd like to share some of those messages with you now. The Colgrave family of Bracken Ridge write, "Thank you, ma'am, for your amazing service to God and country. May you rest in peace." Linda Roberts in North Lakes said, "No words can really express our thanks for your service. You are one in a million." Chloe and Joshua Bachman from Mango Hill, with their children Lucas, Hannah, Grace and Eli, say, "Thank you for your stoic, empowering service. You were a pillar of consistency in our life. Thank you for your empowering young women around the world." Thank you for empowering. Marie Paul of Aspley wrote, "Memories of the Queen will remain deep in all our hearts." I visited Ballycara, a retirement village in Scarborough recently, and it was great to see the residents come forward to share their condolences and memory of Her Majesty. Judy Copeland was one resident who remembered attending a Coronation Street party for the Queen, dressed as a fairy in 1953. Lastly, from Faye Barron in Deception Bay, a simple heartfelt message that echoes all of our sentiments. "Thank you, hard to believe she is gone." As Her Majesty once said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." Our world shares in the profound grief of the royal family in losing their mother, grandmother and great-grandmother, and I pass on my sincerest condolences during this time. On behalf of myself, the people of Petrie and Australia, we thank God for Her Majesty's faithful service and leadership. May she rest in eternal peace.
I thank the member for Petrie and I call the member for Fraser.
Speaker, much has been said of the Queen's long association with Australia. When the Queen travelled to Australia in 1954, it was the first time a reigning monarch had ever visited Australia. Her association with Australia, however, preceded that, with almost 30 kilograms of dried fruit having been provided for her wedding cake in 1947, the 10,000-mile cake by the Australian Girl Guides. Upon arriving in Melbourne in 1954, nearly 1 million people lined the Queen's Royal Road from Essendon Airport to Government House. The Queen went on to visit Australia 15 more times, and over this time built a special connection with so many in our community. As the member for Fraser, I want to focus on the connection between the Queen's service and the nature of my electorate and the broader modern Australian community. When the Queen first toured Australia in 1954, Australia was still experiencing the burden of the White Australia policy. It was a very different nation to the Australia of 2022. Almost 7 decades on from that first visit, we are now one of the world's great multicultural communities. We are simultaneously home to the world's oldest continuous culture and to people who identify from over 270 different ancestries. I represent one of the country's most diverse electorates. Nearly half of its over 170,000 citizens were born overseas or have parents born overseas. They come from over 170 countries, with the largest community having its origins in Vietnam. The residents of Fraser speak over 111 languages and practice over 30 religions. In reflecting on the Queen's life, I also reflected on why and how she mattered for a highly diverse modern community such as my own, many of whose members only arrived in Australia recently. What is the role that the Queen played in modern Australia, and how had this evolved as Australia had? In a recent essay about the monarchy's nuanced relationship with modern Australia's multiculturalism, a young person from Australia's Vietnamese community noted that the involvement of the Queen in community service over an extended period of time had resonated with her and many in her community. To quote, "Look at my family. They're very big on the good works and good deeds. I think that could be a reflection of the wider community. Actions speak louder than words." I'm a Republican, but regardless of where one stands on that issue, it has been very noticeable to me how the Queen's extended service to community resonated across the many different and varied elements of the Fraser community. A second and related issue for me is the Queen's own observations on tolerance and diversity. She lived through an era when Australia and many other nations experienced a range of challenges that created many social tensions and were misused by many to sow division. A good example of her response to this was her 2004 annual Christmas message, where many countries in the world were responding to the threat of terrorism. She highlighted the parable of the Good Samaritan who helped a despised foreigner. She said, and quote, "Some people feel that their own beliefs are being threatened. They all need to be reassured that there is so much to be gained by reaching out to others, that diversity is indeed a strength and not a threat." In addition to her unwavering dedication to service, which many have noted eloquently during the course of today's speeches, I believe that it is this service, when coupled with the Queen's commitment to democratic institutions, to diversity and to tolerance, that helps why she appealed to a community like Fraser, which comes from so many varied backgrounds. Over her long reign, Queen Elizabeth saw Australia change, and she knew that it would and should continue to do so. She always had faith in our nation's capacity to chart its own course. To the Queen's family and loved ones, including to King Charles III, I pass on my condolences. And can I conclude by paying tribute to Queen Elizabeth II and to her dedication to duty, faith, service and family, which was inspiring and comforting to so many.
I thank the member for Fraser, and I call the member for North Sydney.
Thank you. I rise today to speak on behalf of the people of North Sydney to extend our condolences to the royal family on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II was an extraordinary person who dedicated her life to public service. Her Majesty's 70 years' reign as head of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth has had a deep impact on the world as we know it. As the longest-ruling British monarch in history, Queen Elizabeth II presided over a period of immense change, from the aftermath of the Second World War to the moon landing, the development of television and the internet, multiple economic crises and the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Known for her quick wit and generous wit, gracious and fortitude, Her Majesty bore witness to some of the world's greatest medical and technological breakthroughs and was frequently a steadying presence and a source of comfort and constancy for many during turbulent and unpredictable times. Indeed, more than 8 in 10 Australians have not known a world without Queen Elizabeth II. In the North Sydney electorate, Queen Elizabeth II will be remembered fondly. She in fact visited our community for the first time in February 1954 as part of her first official royal tour of Australia. Current Hunters Hill Mayor Zach Miles describes her visit at the time as a cherished moment in history for our community. He says residents turned up in great numbers to wave and cheer at the open-topped motorcade as it glided past Boronia Park on Ryde Road, something especially arranged for the people of Hunters Hill by request of the council of the day. Similarly, in Lane Cove, the Royal Entourage had planned to traverse quickly through the community by travelling from Concord Repatriation Hospital to Sydney via the Fig Tree Bridge and Burns Bay Road. According to current Mayor Andrew Zabik's recount, however, the Lane Cove crowds lining Burns Bay Road were up to 5 people deep in places. The public reception was so immense that the car had to slow down to a snail's pace, and the Mayor Alderman George Vetterman at the time was actually able to say, "Welcome to Lane Cove, Your Majesty," to which the Queen graciously responded, "Thank you, Mr Mayor." Up at the main shopping centre, the Duke of Edinburgh spotted 9-year-old Rosemary Gardner holding a bouquet of flowers. Rosemary threw it, and the Duke caught it on the fly as the car moved on. And at the corner of Parklands Avenue, the Duke saw yet another girl, Susan Bowles, holding a bouquet. This time, the Duke leant out the car window and scooped it up as the motorcade drove past. In the North Sydney local government area, crowds lined Military Road in Neutral Bay to see the Royal Motorcade, and 48,000 school children saw the Queen as she drove slowly through St Leonard's Park, where a plaque was later placed to commemorate her visit. As the current Mayor, Zoe Baker, has said, the Queen's long reign has been admired and respected by many. She will be mourned and sadly missed. The Queen is also remembered fondly in the Willoughby local government area, with current Willoughby Mayor Tanya Taylor noting that the beloved Queen Elizabeth II Grove in Muston Park, which features lemon-scented gums and a beautiful wisteria walkway, is named in the Queen's honour and never ceases to enchant anyone who visits. Meanwhile, in the small community of Alec Town, near Parkes in New South Wales, my great-grandmother, Amy Marshall, had bought a new dress and was diligently practising her curtsy. My great-grandfather and Goobong Shire President, George Marshall, had been invited to attend the reception for the Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip when they visited Dubbo on the 10th of February in 1954. The Queen and Prince Philip may have just been on the ground for an hour and a half that day in Dubbo, but both my great-grandmother's dress and the official invitation are still with my mum in Coonabarabran, who fondly recalls her grandparents regaling her with the experience. It seems that it really didn't matter how long you had in the presence of Queen Elizabeth II. Somehow she had a way of making every person she met feel like they were the only one that mattered in that moment, and that she, like they, would remember the exchange for a lifetime. Queen Elizabeth II's legacy to us has been one where she encouraged us to be all we can be, and she modelled for us what true servant leadership looks like. Valet, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Thank the member for North Sydney, and I call the member for Ballarat.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And in speaking on this condolence motion, I want to convey the thanks of the people of Ballarat for Her Majesty's 70 years of service. In reflecting on Her Majesty's life and in the past 15 days, I am acutely conscious that many First Nations peoples have been grieving this week for loss of place, for loss of culture and identity. And I do believe in the complex nature of this nation there is room to both acknowledge and respect the role Her Majesty has played throughout her life, at the same time as understanding its place in our history. That is, after all, how we change, by recognising who we are as a nation, all of our history and its complexity, and how it's been experienced differently by different peoples, respecting those experiences and working together to shape what comes next. It's in that spirit I wish to acknowledge the rich contribution of Queen Elizabeth II to our Australian story. It seems unfathomable to all of us that at the age of 25 someone could dedicate 70 years of their life to the service of the community with such grace, dignity and care and such constancy. The story of the past 70 years tells an extraordinary story of our nation's progress. From 1954, with the Queen's first visit to our shores, the nation is a very different place. My home town of Ballarat is very different too. Since its founding, Ballarat has had a long history of royal visits. In the 19th century we welcomed Prince Alfred and Prince George, and in the 20th we welcomed more dukes, princes and assorted royalty than I could name. But the two visits that have meant the most in our living history, and of which memories remain the strongest, are of course the visits of Queen Elizabeth II. In 1954 and of course in 2000, the people of Ballarat came out to welcome the Queen. If you look at the photos from 1954, it looks like the entire town of Ballarat was there, decked out in their best and crowding the streets for the very best view. The photos of the Queen in the Botanic Gardens at the then only second Ballarat Begonia Festival are very much part of our local history, having been reported that she said, "We grow begonias as big as saucers, but you as big as dinner plates." By the year 2000, the crowds along Sturt Street hadn't thinned, and I was elected the year after that, after her visit. And if you talk to anyone who lived in Ballarat at the time, we have very clear memories of the day, whether it be gathering with family, with friends, or with school groups, with some of the gorgeous women in our community dressing up with tiaras and pearls as they greeted her. I've never actually been able to confirm this story, but local legend tells us that there was some controversy that helicopters were hired to be flown down the main street the day before her visit to ensure that any loose acorns were blown from the trees, as there was great concern that Her Majesty would slip on one or roll her ankle on her walk down Sturt Street. We showed her our best on those occasions, whether it be the beautiful Begonia Festival in 1954 to our famous Sovereign Hill in 2000. And I'm also pleased to report that the new King has also been to Ballarat and to Sovereign Hill. When you think of those two visits to Ballarat, it's impossible not to reflect on how much our community and our city has changed over those years. In 1954, we were still a small town in a distant corner of the world. By 2000, Ballarat and the world had changed, and we've been changing ever since. Through all of that change, there has been a constant. A woman of extraordinary dedication to service, to duty, to family and to people. The people of Ballarat send our condolences to King Charles III and his family. It's a time of grief for them, and we wish him all the very best for the years to come.
I thank the member for Ballarat, and I call the member for Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My grandmother is the same age as Queen Elizabeth and has now outlived her. She was part of the 70% of Australians who turned out to see the Queen while visiting Australia. She had a fleeting interaction with the Queen, and it became an anecdote to be passed down the generations. I find it hard to imagine the pressure of every moment of small talk turning into a treasured anecdote for someone, let alone for 70 years. The depth of mourning for the Queen across the world is largely because we know that we lose something extraordinary as we mark the passing of her and her generation. She was part of the generation that grew up in the Depression and spent their formative years in a world war. They were shaped by service to community and country and making the best of it. There was to be no complaining. People had manners, treated each other with compassion and focused more on their own obligations than on their rights. Life was about community, and she spent much of her energy recognising people's contributions to community. These are core virtues that have not been tested in a generation like mine in Australia. Living through relative peace and economic prosperity has shifted our focus inwards. In many ways, we are the poorer for it. The world has changed so much in her 96 years, from radio to internet and from empire to Brexit. The role of the Crown has shifted and will continue to shift. There must have been times when she didn't know how to fulfil her duty, when the modern world and the millennium-old institution she was upholding came into conflict. She must have felt frustrated by decisions of the leaders who served alongside her, unsure about how to respond to the long-term impacts of colonisation, and bemused by the shifting values of those around her. But she never showed it. She knew that her role was to provide stability and dignity, and she delivered that to the end through 16 Australian Prime Ministers and 40 corgis. She was the custodian of the British culture of self-restraint. For many, the Queen's passing is a painful reminder of the impact of colonisation. I learnt yesterday of the passing of another cultural leader, Mr Woolagudja, a respected Wadawda man and artist from the Moanjum community in the Kimberley region, whose art of the Wandjina, a sacred creation spirit, was the centrepiece at the opening of the Sydney Olympics, and whose cultural role it was to maintain Wandjina cave paintings for his people and pass on knowledge of his country and culture to younger generations. He too, like the Queen, worked hard to preserve his culture, following his people's removal off their country to Moanjum community near Derby, leaving a legacy for emerging community leaders. I pay my respects for his passing too. Moanjum is a long way from London. At this time of mourning across the world, we can learn from First Nations people's deep respect for their elders. The Queen spoke to people of all ages with respect, and they returned her respect.
The pre-primaries from Hollywood Primary and my electorate shared their thoughts about the Queen. River said she was the Queen. Her job was to tell people what to do, and some things she had to do, like helping people. Andy said, when the Queen dies, everyone needed to do less work because they needed to remember her. Her job was to look after the government. Her crown had jewels, and she wore it so everyone knew that she was the Queen. Jack said she bosses the Prime Minister. Ollie said her job was to work a lot. And Yolanda said, I love her care. She cared about everyone. These kids will remember her in name only, but for those of us who witnessed some of the changes during her 70-year reign, both good and bad, we will remember her quiet and committed service as we watch the world continue to change rapidly. The world will never see another like her. On behalf of the people of Curtin, I extend my condolences to the family and the peoples of Queen Elizabeth.
I thank the member for Curtin. I call the member for Eden Monaro.
Condolences and that of the people of Eden Monaro on the death of Queen Elizabeth II on September 8 this year. I wish to recognise the extraordinary and long-lasting contribution she has made and the great sense of loss being felt across Australia's territories, the Eden Monaro region and our very diverse communities. Her Majesty the Queen was a remarkable role model. Over the course of 70 years of service and duty, we came to learn a lot about her sense of humour, her unwavering grace and commitment to service, including to that of the Australian people. Her Majesty demonstrated a great interest in the vitality and prosperity of regional Australia, and she spent time in many regional centres and small towns, many of which are in the electorate of Eden Monaro. In March 1963, on just her second trip to Australia, Queen Elizabeth II toured the then Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Authority, which we now know as Snowy Hydro. Her presence was felt across the region, visiting Cooma, Jindabyne, Yukonbean, Kyandra, Guthiga and Cubramurra. From Talbingo to Cancoban and Adaminity to Berrydale, through to Queanbeyan, where Her Majesty unveiled a plaque to commemorate her visit in 1977, which still stands today in the Bicentennial Hall, the Queen made visiting our regions a priority. And these townships and their communities are forever etched into royal history. As the member for the vast seat of Eden Monaro, I often talk about the amount of kilometres I've travelled visiting constituents and communities, and it is not lost on me when reflecting on Queen Elizabeth II's journey across Eden Monaro, across Australia and the entire Commonwealth, that her journeys would have taken in probably millions of kilometres, travelling the realm, visiting communities big and small, to express her service to our communities. And I want to express my deep respect and admiration to Her Majesty for that feat alone. Throughout her visits, Her Majesty gained a deep understanding of regional Australia and the hard-working people in these communities. In her leadership and service, she has inspired countless people to advocate for and represent their own communities. And I want to acknowledge the lasting connection Queen Elizabeth II has with two organisations that are especially active across Eden Monaro. First, from the Country Women's Association, who have said through my office, our deepest sympathy to the royal family on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen was an inspiration to us all through her dedication and service to our country. May she rest in eternal peace. And from the Girl Guides, who said, Her Majesty has a strong connection with Girl Guides from when she made her Girl Guide promise at age 11 as a member of the first Buckingham Palace Guides. At Girl Guide halls throughout Eden Monaro, portraits of the Queen have been a constant in the lives of the many girls and women who have passed through them. Her Majesty showed the world the strength and courage of young women when they lead. Her Majesty demonstrated what it is to do your best and to positively contribute to your community by keeping a promise that she made in her youth. No matter how short or long her life would be, it would be one of service. And I extend my deepest gratitude to the work of both of those organisations. And as the patron Girl Guide for Queanbeyan and Bega, I echo the sentiments from both the Girl Guides and the Country Women's Association. In my role as Minister for Territories, I wanted to acknowledge the deep connection that Her Majesty had with the Territories of Australia. Her commitment to Canberra, visiting the national capital on 14 separate occasions, more than any other Australian city, showed that most. Queen Elizabeth II enjoyed a plentiful following, but in Canberra her royal visits captured the hearts of thousands as they gathered in droves just to catch a glimpse of her. Her Majesty's trips spanned from 1954, when she opened a session of what is now the old Parliament House, to her final visit in 2011, where she was welcomed by 3 exceptional women and leaders: our then Governor-General Dame Quentin Bryce, the Honourable Julia Gillard, our first female Prime Minister, and now Senator Katie Gallagher, who at the time was Chief Minister of the ACT. In Her Majesty's second last trip to Australia in 2006, Queen Elizabeth II honoured the courageous and heroic firefighters who fought the January 2003 bushfires, an important acknowledgement of the nation's capital. She visited Cocos Keeling Islands in 1954 and Norfolk Island in 1974. Her generous time and presence on both islands were warmly remembered and welcomed. I'm grateful for the recognition that the people of our community have shown Queen Elizabeth. She was a remarkable woman, an exemplary role model, and her presence will be forever felt across our country.
And I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the address to His Majesty King Charles III and pay tribute to the life of Queen Elizabeth II, a remarkable sovereign, but first and foremost a remarkable person, a remarkable human being. She, of course, was born in 1926 and as a young girl lived in London during the Blitz. My own grandfather, who's still alive, thankfully, also lived in London at that time, and I know through the experiences he had of how significant that was in shaping her and her dedication to the future roles that she, of course, would undertake with such spectacular aplomb as our sovereign for 70 years. The monarchy has a few compulsory elements and many, albeit expected, voluntary components. And Queen Elizabeth II undertook an enormous workload and did far beyond the minimum requirements of the role of sovereign. Apart from opening the Parliament and signing various instruments, etc., which she did with great aplomb and consistency, she was an unbelievable leader, patron, contributor to communities throughout the Commonwealth, both before and particularly during her 70-year reign. In this country, of course, we were particularly lucky to have her visit us on 16 separate occasions, and every time leave such a spectacular impact and legacy on so many communities throughout the nation. We're so lucky to have a system of government with the institution of the monarchy at our pinnacle. We are one of the great, proudest and oldest continuing democracies, and it is because we have a constitutional monarchy, and her custodianship of the role of sovereign of the Crown and that institution for 70 years is why we continue to be such a vibrant democracy. The monarchy is at the head of so many elements of our society, of our government, of our economy. This Parliament, of course, the executive, the judiciary, the armed forces, many community organisations from the Scouts, the Girl Guides, RSL, on our currency, at times on our postage stamps. And we should really cherish and fight for what a stable system we have under our constitutional monarchy in this country, and reflect on where we could have been if we didn't have it, to keep such a spectacular, peaceful and tranquil democratic nation that we live in and sometimes perhaps take for granted. We must always be vigilant, and in remembering Her Majesty, remember that while she was at the head of that institution, we have had such an exceptional 70 years as a nation. In my electorate, like all electorates, there has been, of course, a remarkable outpouring of both grief but also commemoration and in sometimes celebration of a remarkable life, a remarkable contribution to this nation, like so many members have reflected. All of our offices where we've had condolence books, people coming in a steady stream, not only to leave a message but often to have conversations with us as members and our staff about sometimes personal experiences they had with the Sovereign, but also their love and admiration for Queen Elizabeth II and what she did in that role for so very, very long. In recent months, of course, we heard media reports of times when she could not maintain the pace and the workload that she had until so very recently, and it reminds us of what an exceptionally hard-working lady she was into her 96th year. 30 years, more than 30 years after the retirement age in the United Kingdom, she was still working harder than any of us because, of course, she took so seriously that vow of serving the Commonwealth for the entirety of her life, and she absolutely kept that vow. Our deepest condolences to His Majesty King Charles III, the royal family, and grateful thanks from myself, my electorate and all Australians for her service to this nation.
I thank the member for Sturt and I call the member for Holt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I am grateful for the opportunity to express my condolences for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty's dedicated service to the people of the United Kingdom, and indeed all of her subjects within the Commonwealth since 1952, was without equal. For the vast majority of Australians, she was the only monarch we ever knew. Her warm presence and voice has been a steady source of comfort and reassurance, and its absence will be sorely felt by many. It is well known that the Queen truly loved Australia and its people. Our easygoing attitude and our beautiful land leave an impression on most, and this was certainly reflected by our Queen. Her admiration was shown on many occasions. Indeed, on her last visit to Australia in 2011, she remarked, "Ever since I first came here in 1954, I watched Australia grow and develop at an extraordinary rate. This country has made dramatic progress economically, in social, scientific and industrial endeavours, and, above all, in self-confidence." I do not doubt that the Queen remained impressed with our nation's path since the statement over a decade ago. As our head of state, Queen Elizabeth oversaw the development of Australia's relationship between the United Kingdom from the 1950s to the present. No matter the issue or event, Her Majesty approached all matters with the grace and diligence she was well known for. She placed her faith in the people of Australia and in our institutions to solve the challenges facing our nation. The Queen's ability to voluntarily keep together over 50 ethnically, religiously, culturally diverse nations in the Commonwealth for over 7 decades is a testament to her statecraft. The Queen was truly dedicated to each Commonwealth nation and showed admiration for all cultures and religions. An example of this commitment was during the height of Britain's response to the apartheid in South Africa. Her belief against the apartheid was such she outright rejected then British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's attempts to stop the sanctions against the apartheid regime. No one was more grateful for her actions than Nelson Mandela, who always referred to the Queen as my dear friend Elizabeth. While the second Elizabethan era has come to an end, I am confident that our memories of Her Majesty will be with us for the rest of our lives. Queen Elizabeth II's example of public service and dedication should never be forgotten, and this is how I will continue to honour her. I thank the House.
Thank the member for Holt. I call the member for Kooyong.
Deputy Speaker. In the days since Her Majesty's death, dozens of Kooyong constituents have contacted me to express their sadness and their sense of loss. What unites their views is the feeling that Queen Elizabeth was to them both a phenomenon, a symbol of modern history, but also a person, a woman who assumed a role of great responsibility at an early age, who carried that responsibility throughout her adult life, a woman for whom most felt great respect and admiration. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II ruled for an extraordinary 70 years, a period of accelerating turbulence and seismic transition in our world. Her time on the throne saw a revolution in science, in technology, industry, geopolitics and sociology. When she was 6 years old, a young Elizabeth told her riding instructor that she wanted to grow up to be a country lady with lots of horses and dogs. The circumstances of her birth were such that that could never be her future, but her love of the countryside remained and was transmuted into decades of advocacy for wildlife and the environment. Australians in their 70s and older can remember when that 25-year-old Englishwoman was suddenly thrust into the world's spotlight, placed on a 1,200-year-old throne and crowned with the weight of history, the expectation and responsibility of a Commonwealth. Those older Australians grew up with Her Majesty. As they married and had children, so too did their Queen. As they moved through each stage of life, experiencing love and loss, so too did their Queen. As they raised their children and their grandchildren, we learnt from them of a Queen that they felt connected to, a constant in their lives and then in our lives, whose steadfast stoicism was always there, providing familiar comfort and calm. For many Australians, though, this period of mourning the Queen cannot be separated from their own lifetimes of mourning bloodlines and songlines, of land, language and children stolen. The persisting sorrow felt by many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as Australia pays tribute to our Queen cannot be denied. Those First Nations people were dispossessed of a land on which they'd lived for tens of thousands of years through a declaration of terra nullius, nobody's land. We all share this history. We must all speak and hear our truths, and we must acknowledge our past if we are to move forward together. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Queen Elizabeth took to the BBC to speak to her millions of subjects. She told them, while we may still have more to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again. At that time of great anxiety, her message was a metaphorical steadying hand on the shoulder of a people grappling with uncharted certainty and fear for their loved ones and for themselves. One of her final speeches was less than a year ago at the Glasgow Climate Change Conference. Unusually, she used that address to appeal directly to political leaders who had gathered to act on climate change. And she told them, if we fail to cope with this challenge, all other problems will fade into insignificance. Her parting words have become more poignant with the passage of time, but they apply to the people of Australia, and they're very relevant to us in this House. None of us will live together forever, but we are doing this for our children and for our children's children. When Queen Elizabeth was crowned in 1954, the Australian House of Representatives had 124 members. None were women. The past is a foreign country, and the Australia of 1954 is a very different Australia from that of 2022. The second Elizabethan age has seen the world change immeasurably. It has seen Australia achieve a new maturity which has, I believe, allowed us to recognise that this is the time to recognise all of our history and to move on together as a nation. The people of Kooyong thank Queen Elizabeth II for her duty and for her service. Her death marks the end of an era. May we all reflect on her words, her example and her legacy as we embark upon the next.
The member for Hunter.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to make contribution on the condolence motion for Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of the people of the Hunter. The Queen represents a generation that we may never see again, one of unwavering commitment to duty and a lifetime of public service in the greatest of limelight. She embodied grace, care, comfort and kindness. She was a source of strength, stability in an ever-changing world. Something that I admire about the Queen is that she was certainly no stranger to hard work. She was the epitome of formality and elegance. She also loved to get her hands dirty. As the Second World War raged closer to the United Kingdom, a young Princess Elizabeth insisted on helping her country's war efforts. She began her training as a mechanic in March 1945 and undertook a driving and vehicle maintenance course. She carried what she learnt as a mechanic throughout the whole of her life, often being seen behind the wheel. She had even been known to diagnose and repair a faulty engine, just as she was taught to during her wartime service. Even as a Queen of 70 years, she still had more experience in the trade than many in this place. This just goes to show you that regardless of your status or position in the world, good life experience and a hands-on training like a trade will never go to waste. Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty's love of horses was well known. She loved to ride them and she owned many a fine racehorse. She had close ties to Australian trainers and one of her horses was even entered in the Melbourne Cup. I have no doubt she would have loved to have visited the world-class horse studs in my electorate, and after visiting these myself, it's easy to see why she loved these amazing animals so much. Her love of cars and horses, plus her good sense of humour, makes her well placed to fit in with many everyday Australians, and I reckon her and I would have got along pretty well too. Deputy Speaker, the Queen was a strong supporter of the Commonwealth Games. I've been lucky enough to represent Australia at 4 Commonwealth Games. I remember at the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne, the Queen visiting, which was met with much excitement by all the athletes involved. The Commonwealth Games gave me the opportunity to visit many different parts of the Commonwealth, which is a very diverse group of countries, all united by her reign. As someone who participated in the Commonwealth Games, I'd like to thank Her Majesty for her support of the Games and the athletes around the world. Some of my best memories are from representing Australia on the Commonwealth stage, and this could not have been made possible without the support of the Queen. For this I'm extremely grateful. Deputy Speaker, unfortunately the people of the Hunter never had the chance to welcome the Queen to her area, with Newcastle and Maitland being the closest she got to the Hunter electorate. However, I'm sure that many in the Hunter have memories of heading to Newcastle or Maitland to join the thousands who line the streets just to get a glimpse of the monarch. Queen Elizabeth II was an example to all in public life, and her leadership leaves lessons for all of us to follow. On behalf of the residents of the Hunter electorate, I extend my sincere condolences to the royal family, and I wish the King, Charles III, all the best as he ascends his lifelong destiny as King. I look forward to hopefully welcoming him to the Hunter electorate at some point in the future and showing him the best part of the Commonwealth, the mighty Hunter Valley.
The member for Fowler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to share condolences for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of my constituents of Fowler, one of the most culturally diverse communities in Australia, where over 70% of our population are born overseas or have parents born overseas. A community that's resilient, hard-working and is the economic backbone of this country. An electorate that reflects a vibrant and rich multicultural Australia, which I share from the sound of it with the member for Fraser. We are concluding a period of mourning, or as we call it in Australia, a period of observance. We have heard many condolences from members in the House today, paying tribute to and farewelling one of the longest monarchs who served her people with grace, humility and empathy. Queen Elizabeth's reign was unique and it was selfless. A woman ahead of her time, she reigned with compassion and led by example in acts of service, instead of ruling with an iron fist as those before her. She knew the crown and the monarch could not exist by demanding service from its people, but rather by serving them. There have been great stories shared today of her visits to Australia. The closest she got to southwestern Sydney was on a train passing Penrith, as the member for Lindsay recalled in her condolences speech this morning. Even the late former Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, who represented the electorate of Fowler as I do today, loved the Queen and what she stood for, as recalled by the Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles this morning. Nevertheless, I know that many of my constituents in Fowler love the Queen as well. Many are migrants and refugees and got to know the monarchy and its great democratic institutions following their resettlement here in Australia. Many of our culturally diverse groups have held memorial services to mark her passing, holding their own unique interpretations of a memorial service. Our electorate of Fowler has also been inundated with requests for her portrait, and we have a waiting list as we have to put in for more orders. I send my sincere condolences to the Queen's family and wish the new King, King Charles III, a prosperous and healthy reign. Now you can lay your crown at the feet of the Lord and rest your weary head, for he will give you rest and eternal peace in heaven. I would like to end on a poem written by one of my constituents, the Beherench family of St John's Park, dedicated to the late Queen. Today I walk this world with sorry, the darkest day I have now seen. For the news I have heard, the greatest lady had passed, my Queen. Her life of service to the end, she walked the Commonwealth miles to miles. Always known for her energetic smiles, the greatest woman I have known. To the world she shone, to all. A place in my heart will always be there. My honour to your service will always be there. Your service has now come to pass. We all feel the heaviest of hearts. Vow to Queen Elizabeth II, my Queen. With glinting eyes and beautiful smile to last, may 1,000 angel wings will carry you to your heaven, to the love of your life, to Philip as to where the angels sing. Forever to your life service, and to all of those you ruled over, with a pure heart to all in heaven, to all in between. You're my ma'am, my sovereign, my Queen. Thank you.
The member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise today to offer my condolences to the family of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. 25 years old, what a young age to step into public life. And Her Majesty did this day after day for 70 years. We live in a time where people typically change their career 3 times in their life and retire in their 60s, as opposed to their 90s. Queen Elizabeth's commitment to community service is clear. I like to think that Her Majesty was ahead of her time. When she was 19 years old, she trained as a mechanic. I imagine that she was a part of a small but growing number of women who picked up a trade during wartime efforts. I hope that this little-known fact encourages girls to know that you can both get on the tools and put on a dress and frock up, but perhaps not at the same time. Her Majesty was no technophobe. The Queen stepped into a role at a time where television was brand new. For the Queen's coronation ceremony, the then UK Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, was horrified at the thought of using cameras inside the sacred Westminster Abbey. Meanwhile, Her Majesty arguably wanted to break down class barriers and televise the ceremony. For the first time in history, about 30 million people witnessed the coronation, and many more tuned in across the world. The Queen was one of the first televised working mothers the public saw. Yeah, she had support bringing up her children. However, I think that she understood what working women needed, and that's support. I was so pleased to learn that Queen Elizabeth II opened Lady Gowrie Kindergarten in 1963 in East Victoria Park, my home suburb, which is in the heart of Swan. Lady Gowrie, another woman ahead of her time, was passionate about the well-being of children, early childhood education, particularly for disadvantaged children. She achieved the extraordinary, which was for the Commonwealth Government to establish Lady Gowrie childcare centres in 1939. Childcare was critical due to skill shortages from the wartime effort, and of course childcare allowed women to step up and participate in the paid workforce. Better access to childcare was needed in the 1930s, and we still need it in the 2020s. In my humble opinion, our Queen had the most genuine smiles and the twinkliest eyes when she interacted with children. Perhaps this was because of children's infectious joy and unfiltered enthusiasm. I love this story from her visit to Geraldton in 1988. Two sisters, Belinda de Courty and Jo Hawkins, had travelled with their parents from Mullawa. As free-spirited country girls do, they ran into the crowd, past the barricades, to present the Queen with some flowers. Quickly, security nabbed Belinda and she immediately burst into tears. Prince Philip quickly intervened and the girls were able to meet Her Majesty. The girls remember a gentle and kind lady. The Queen was in disbelief when the girls explained that they had a pet kangaroo and an emu back on the farm. There's another story in 1988, but in the goldfields. A young 26-year-old woman, Kerry Pettit, got the gig of teaching 1,200 students from multiple schools to perform a dance for the Queen. She only had 3 months to prepare. She had to somehow take a gaggle of students from multiple schools and multiple towns and transform them into a unified dance troupe, literally fit for a queen. Students from Campbelda, Coolgardie and Kalgoorlie piled into the Oval, draped in green and gold, and I was lucky enough to be one of those students. So I got to rock out to Johnny Farman's You're the Voice and celebrate good times for the Queen. I would not have imagined that a little girl who danced for the Queen on the grass at the Kalgoorlie Oval would, 36 years later, swear allegiance to the Queen as our head of state in this very place. And of course, Her Majesty opened this building, which she explained is the embodiment of the democratic principles of freedom, equality and justice, which I feel is the reason why I'm here. Following on from what our Prime Minister said yesterday, I agree that the biggest tribute that we can pay to the Queen is to have a sense of duty to each other and have a new sense of service to our community.
The member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And it's a great honour to be able to speak on this condolence motion today in memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Deputy Speaker, many of my colleagues have spoken about the great affection in which the Queen was held, and they're right. No person was more respected across Australian society. And that respect was held not simply because of her office, but because of how she conducted herself in that office. We saw something in her that we would like to see in ourselves. Often in life, the most profound thing we can do is persevere. The Queen was the living embodiment of the power of perseverance. Stoic, steadfast, resolute. Through the trials faced by her nation, her family and the world, she kept going. I think that quiet perseverance is at the heart of why we so admired the Queen. In every life, challenges arise, and it can be hard to stay the course. The Queen never wavered. On some deep level, as human beings, we know that perseverance is everything. The Queen persevered. Of course, those who have great privilege and responsibility given to them can respond in extremely different ways. There are countless examples in history of people who inherited great power, then behaving shamefully. Sometimes they've been indifferent to the people they were meant to serve. Sometimes their self-absorption has consumed them, and sometimes they've been deliberately destructive. Their power allowed them to indulge themselves. The Queen took the exact opposite course. Where some would look after their own interests, she served others. Where some would give lip service to the idea of duty, she lived it. She didn't flinch, she didn't falter, she never gave up. Her guiding light was not her ego, but her country. The values of duty, honour and country can seem passé in the modern world. But in the 20th century, those values saved the world. They may be called upon again. In thinking about how we conduct ourselves in the years ahead, we should remember the example of the Queen. In our own ways, large and small, we should define our duty and then live it. And like her, we should persevere.
The member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to add my voice to this motion to celebrate the life of Queen Elizabeth II. I carry with me the voices of so many residents of Hasluck, including the grandmother who fondly remembers dancing before the Queen on one of her many visits, and the older generation who remember standing for the then anthem in the Picture Theatre. After the Queen and Duke drove through the Swan Valley and the Perth Hills in 1954, local resident Anne Harding Bamford was quoted waxing lyrical in the Swan Express of her fleeting glimpse as they passed by. Though no word was spoken, I clearly could see that in that short moment between her and me, a bond had been forged whose memory would stay to remind me forever of that glorious day. I especially want to mention the members of our RSL clubs. They're in Bellevue, Chidlow, Ellenbrook and Kalamunda, and Mundaring, who express their reverence to the Queen's dedication to a life in public service. Likewise, a number of generations of veterans have served Queen and country. The Kalamunda sub-branch of the RSL remembers. Australian men and women have proudly worn Her Majesty's emblems, their Royal Australian Navy badge, their Army Corps badges or their RAF Squadron badges surmounted by the St Edward's crown Her Majesty wore at her coronation. They have been proudly worn by our veterans in every corner of the world. On her 21st birthday in 1947, the then Princess Elizabeth set the tone for her eventual reign, promising to us all that she would devote her life to our service, and to the very end she remained steadfast in that promise. And that term service forms an inextricable bond between our members and Her late Majesty. As we veterans have served, along with our affiliate members from organisations such as the State Emergency Service and the Volunteer Fire Brigades, we have had the beacon of her own unfailing service to guide our actions. The Queen's very long reign combined with her tireless work ethic and allowed her to connect directly and indirectly with more people across the globe than perhaps any world leader in history. She made the world smaller and united people from across the many nations and cultures. On a personal level, this has meant that even though I have personally never met Her Majesty, I am connected to her with only one degree of separation, in that firstly, my parents-in-law from former Yugoslavia had the opportunity in 1974, while living in what was then known as the Australian territory of Papua New Guinea, to attend a garden party at Port Moresby with the Queen. And secondly, some years ago, I had the opportunity to meet the lady from Subiaco, Western Australia, who taught the Queen to drive during World War II. As we've heard throughout the condolence motions today, these are not unusual stories. In a time of rapid technological, economic, social and geopolitical change, it is hard to think of any person who managed to stand steadfast as the Queen did and represent an unwavering ideal. I read through our office condolence book in Hasluck before coming to Canberra. One word repeated: remarkable.
Yeah. The member for Moore.
Mr Deputy Speaker, on behalf of a grateful nation, I rise to convey my sincere condolences to the royal family on the passing of a beloved sovereign and head of state, Queen Elizabeth II. This Parliament mourns the loss of our late Queen, who served her people of the Commonwealth dutifully with great dignity and grace for 70 years, celebrating her Platinum Jubilee this year. As Australia's head of state for the past 7 decades, the Queen has led us through both the good times that have defined our nation and also through the struggles of the difficult times, uniting us, the Australian people, through natural disasters, international conflicts, economic downturns, crises, and even the recent pandemic. Inspired by her leadership and example, Australians have built a thriving nation post the Second World War, with a strong, prosperous economy and a stable civil society. Such is the esteem in which our late Queen is held that over the past few days we have seen millions of people across the globe queuing to sign condolence books, attending memorial services in churches, and paying their respects by lining the streets of the United Kingdom to witness her funeral procession. The sophistication colour and pageantry of the proceedings served as a reminder to us all of the importance of economic development, military service, discipline, the rule of law and patriotism in defining who we are as a society and nation. As Queen of Australia, Queen Elizabeth II set a fine example for us to follow. Our national and cultural identity as Australians is inextricably entwined in the Crown. If you like the direction provided by a compass. We are not the lucky country by chance. Our prosperity and stability is the result of our system of government. My electorate of Moore is home to a large British community, with approximately 17% of our population born in the United Kingdom and more than 40% of residents having close family connections to Britain. British culture is an intrinsic part of our everyday lives. It is part of our language, our customs, our traditions, our culture, our manners and our social graces. We are proud of our British heritage that is now an intrinsic part of modern Australian culture. As head of the Commonwealth, the Queen has contributed to strengthening international relations. Today, the Commonwealth comprises 56 member states, covering an area of approximately 30 million square kilometres, with a combined population of more than 2.4 billion of the world's citizens. As the name suggests, the Commonwealth is an institution that has lifted billions of people out of poverty across the globe by providing governance, the rule of law, and promoting industry, economic development and security. The crown is heavy because it represents a glorious burden of responsibility for the welfare, security and prosperity of the people of the Commonwealth. I have fond memories of our late Queen. Growing up in Singapore, I first learned about Queen Elizabeth from my grandparents. As a Eurasian family, we are the descendants of British migrants who settled in the bustling colony of the Straits Settlements as pioneers during the days of Raffles, which later became known as Singapore. My late maternal grandfather, T.B. Smith, kept a framed portrait at home of a very young Queen Elizabeth. I was brought up on stories of the history of the royal family, and as a high school student, I helped plant a tree in Leederville to commemorate the Ruby Jubilee in 1992. I recall queuing up among a large crowd in the warm sun on the tarmac at Perth Airport in 2002 to catch a glimpse of the Queen as she arrived in Western Australia, and years later at Government House in St George's Terrace for her subsequent visit to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The Queen is a remarkable lady who enjoyed the outdoors and rural pursuits. As we look to the future in a rapidly changing and uncertain world, we will face new threats and challenges to our country, welfare and economic prosperity. We will rise to meet these new challenges. We now place our trust in new King Charles III to lead us forward and overcome the obstacles in our path. Long may he reign, and may Almighty God save the King.
The member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Many have had plenty to say here today, and I thought that the best way for me to pay my tributes was to involve those in my electorate of Bennelong. Today I'll be reading out short messages of condolence on behalf of local community organisations. Mr Deputy Speaker, this message of condolence is from Jim Morris, President of the North Ryde RSL Community Club, and Mick Lair, President of the North Ryde RSL Sub-Branch. On behalf of the members of North Ryde RSL Community Club and Sub-Branch, we offer our heartfelt condolences to King Charles III, his family and all the members of the Commonwealth on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Australia and the world have lost a truly inspirational woman who in 1952 committed to public service when she said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." The Queen fulfilled this commitment throughout her 70-year reign, during the good times and the not-so-good, with integrity, humility and grace. Indeed, an excellent example of how one should live one's life during these difficult times. She had a commitment to independent thought, a policy of non-interference and an ability to join disparate peoples together. We should all aspire to these standards. She saw and understood the greater good. May she rest in eternal peace. Mr Speaker, this message of condolence is from John Curdy OAM, President of the Epping RSL sub-branch. The veterans of the Epping RSL sub-branch of the Return Services League of Australia mourn the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the Commander-in-Chief of our Defence Forces. Since her first military service in 1945, Her Majesty has had a long and proud association with the Defence Forces, in which she has held many honorary appointments. We join with Australia, the Commonwealth of Nations and with the millions across the world who are currently participating in history, witnessing the end of an era of Queen Elizabeth II, an era embracing post-war reconstruction and the many changes and challenges to our society over those 7 decades. We remember and reflect upon her life, to her unselfish service, to all above self, her compassion to all, and ever the peacemaker. Lest we forget, the Queen is dead. Long live the King. And this message, Mr Speaker, is from President of the Epping Rotary Club, Mr Bruce Jacob. The Queen lived by a leadership model that has been proven to be very successful. She believed that some aspects of leadership are universal and involve encouraging people and organisations to combine their efforts, talents, insights, enthusiasm and inspiration to work together. The Queen was truly a person who believed in people serving the needs of their local community. Bennelong is very diverse and very harmonious. Epping Rotary and the broader Rotary and service community extend their condolences to the Queen, her family, to the Commonwealth and beyond. May she rest in peace. And lastly, Mr Speaker, this message of condolence is from Carl Pizzato, CEO of the Ryde Eastwood Leagues Club. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's coronation occurred on June 2, 1953. 10 years later, in 1963, Ryde Eastwood Leagues Club was formed. Whereas at first the orbits of a Leagues Club and a ruling monarch might seem worlds apart, the parallels between why both entities exist are plain for all to see. The Queen demonstrated an unstinting passion for charities, donating far and wide across multiple countries and communities. Ryde Eastwood Leagues, in its own right, donates and prides itself in passionately supporting our own community. The Queen was a leader who led by example. She became a symbol of inspiration for many, both within the United Kingdom and here in Australia, as our head of state. In much the same vein, we always look to lead in the same way, by example, to our communities. There are three simple yet all-encompassing words that embody the Queen, and which the Club continues to embrace: longevity, service and community. We, along with the wider area of Bennelong, reflect on the great contribution and dedication the Queen gave in her time and use this as inspiration for who we are and who we want to be. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Wright.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My Queen, honourable members, the Queen is dead. Long live the King. Today I stand on behalf of the people of Wright to offer my respect to her family and those nations that are grieving her passing. I want to associate myself with the comments today made by the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader for the reverent contributions that they made. And in those contributions it was said, grief is the price we pay for love. It was a great love we have for our Queen, thus a great grief. In 2011, it was a farewell tour. The Queen had travelled to Australia on 16 occasions, and I was fortunate to be present in the Great Hall, to be witness to the ceremony that was conducted here. As a new member, only to be sworn in at that dispatch box 12 months beforehand, giving a service of allegiance to the Queen and country, to then be in her presence, was overwhelming. She was 85 and her husband then, Philip, was 90. She visited Canberra, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth, and the following year from that, she celebrated her 60th year on the throne.
But part of the speech I also want to acknowledge King Charles III. In understanding the task that is now in front of him, reflect on the King's lineages of King Charles I and II. In 1625, King Charles I regretfully lost his head to Oliver Cromwell, who was a member of the Parliament, ironically, at that time. The King, in his wisdom, decided to dissolve the Parliament. There was a revolt by the people, a civil war ensued, and the King lost his head. King Charles II, after Lord and Protector Oliver Cromwell, reigned for a relatively short amount of time. For those that seek the Republican journey, can I encourage you to study history as to how long that potentially can last? Only a couple of years later, the age of restoration for Prince Charles II, come where he reigned for 25 years. Prince Charles III has had a lifetime of preparation for the role that he undertakes today. I support a monarchy limited by Constitution. King, know I am your servant. Upon reflection, the other qualities I admire in the Queen are two of these. And this morning I sat and I thought, what are the two remarkable qualities that I can attribute to those in my electorate? And the words that come to mind when reflecting on the Queen's contribution was, number one, her poise, and second, her steadfastness. And when I think of those in my electorate that also carry the tag of poise, I think none other than of Beth Hearn, OAM, who is a volunteer as a secretary of our show society, who rolls up day after day, year after year as a volunteer, knowing that our community is a better place for her contributions. She is graceful and she is elegant. When I think of steadfastness, the quality of the Queen, I think of a distinguished leader in my electorate, none other than Mayor of the Lockyer Valley, Councillor Tanya Milligan, first elected in 2000, elected for 22 years consecutively. Resolute, dutiful and firm. She has led many disasters, mostly floods and droughts, within the electorate of Wright. Mr Speaker, on behalf of the people of Wright and a grieving nation, I pay my respects to a remarkable person who led an exemplary life of service. We close the chapter now on the second Elizabethan age. Vale, my Queen.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Assistant Treasurer.
Thanks. A few brief words on behalf of the people of Whitlam. Words of condolences, words of congratulations. So on behalf of the people of Whitlam, to the family of King Charles, we offer our heartfelt condolences for the loss of your Queen, your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your auntie, and we offer our congratulations to King Charles for his ascension to the throne. It is true to say, as many before me have remarked, and has been remarked within my electorate at the many ceremonies that I've attended, that there's been an outpouring of emotion for the passing of a monarch who has reigned for 70 years. I'm reliably informed, Mr Speaker, that this term of office has only been exceeded by King Louis XIV of France, and that's probably where the comparisons should end. Visited the Illawarra Wollongong on many occasions during her 70 years on the throne. Once in February of 1954, I'm reliably informed, it was a cold, wet, windy day, but thousands of people lined the aptly named Crown Street in Wollongong to watch Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh come past. They met with the then Lord Mayor, Mr J.J. Kelly. Thousands and thousands of people from the south coast, from the southern highlands, gathered there to catch a glimpse and to pay their respects. Amongst them, 500 ex-servicemen from 3 separate wars were there in attendance, and it was remarked that the Duke himself spent quite some time talking to the veterans. 13,000 school kids had the day off school to attend the Wollongong Showground to visit and catch a glimpse of the Queen as she passed by. Again in 1970, the Queen visited Port Kembla, Wollongong, Albion Park as a part of a whirlwind tour, and was then headed off to that second steel town of Newcastle as a part of her visit. They must have picked up a bit about the making of steel and the importance of steel to the Illawarra economy of the time, because on her 16th and final visit, when the Queen and the Duke were here in attendance at Parliament House, I had a conversation with the Duke, and I was surprised with his forensic knowledge of steel making, particularly the blast furnace method of steel making and its contribution to the Illawarra and indeed to the country. I had my daughter with me. My daughter graduated from high school last year. She was tottering around in kindergarten at the time, and it is true to say that she has greater memories of Garamal, who entertained us in the Great Hall at the time, and she can of glimpsing the Queen, but that's a memory that will be resting in her memory forever. Speaker, it is true that all institutions change after time, none less than the monarchy. And through the royal family is often regarded as a pillar of stability, the monarchy has changed radically, including over the years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. This was forced upon it by social change that surrounded it. It's also a mark of the Queen's abilities that this change was accomplished with the within the monarchy and within her role in British life intact. It has been remarked upon many times in previous contributions by members before me today that it is unlikely that we'll see the likes of her again. Her commitment to service, her commitment to the institution of the monarchy, her commitment to public service. And for that we pay her credit. We thank her for her service. She will, as has been said many times, be remembered fondly for many generations to come. I thank the House.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Wide Bay.
Of the people of Wide Bay to convey our respects to our faithful monarch for the past 70 years, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Much changed during her remarkable reign, but her commitment to service did not. In Wide Bay, the outpouring of grief that our long-serving monarch had died was matched only by the excitement of her coronation back in 1953, when the front page of our local paper declared our radiant Queen. In the lead-up to the Queen's coronation at Westminster Abbey, our region prepared for coronation celebrations with the 1953 Gympie show, named the Gympie Coronation Show, featuring buck jumping, bullock riding, wild steer races and a pound cake competition. The Gympie's town hall was decorated. Shop windows had coronation displays. It included a street procession which the local paper described as the biggest procession in the history of the city. Nearly the entire population of the town, 8,000 at that time, came out to pledge their loyalty to the Queen en masse. The world and Wide Bay have radically changed over the 7 decades of her as her monarch. She was Queen when Tin Can Bay went from the kerosene lamp to an electric street light in 1959, when Maryborough sold its first television, when we went from the telegram to the text message. She was Queen when we opened the Rainbow Beach Road, which the Council dubbed the longest length of bitumen in one road in 1966 at a cost of $235,000, opening up Rainbow Beach. And she was Queen when construction of Section D of the Gympie Bypass started at a cost of $1 billion. She was Queen when the Scottish Drive-In on Noosa Road, Gympie, opened in 1968, when people would bring blankets and eskies and watch blockbuster blusters including Jaws and Grease and the Rocky Horror Show projected onto a 45-foot-long screen at $2 a ticket. She was Queen when the drive-in folded in 1990 and when Gympie got its first twin cinema. She served when Gympie had one of the world's biggest butter factories and was Queen when it churned its last batch of butter when it closed in 1978. She was Queen as Wide Bay was assaulted by cyclones, floods and tornadoes, such as the 1985 tornado that destroyed the old Kin Kin butter factory. She was monarch for most of the highest floods in Maryboroug's recorded history, including the second highest surge in 1955, peaking at 11 metres and 24 centimetres, above the 10.8-metre 1974 and 10.7 metres in 2013. She was sovereign when a cyclone hit Noosa in 1954 and the Hastings Street foreshore property owners built the first protective wall at Noosa Beach to stop erosion and seawater from washing into the gardens. She reigned in 1999 when the floods in Gympie hit 21.9 metres and was monarch in 22 when they peaked at 22.9 metres, as well as the floods of 55 and 92. She was Queen when, in 1958, Pomona Railway porter Bruce Samuels climbed Mount Karura running to settle a pub bet, a feat now annually commemorated in the highly successful King of the Mountain Festival. Technology advanced, government services changed and traditions began in the 70 years of Wide Bay with Queen Elizabeth II at the helm. Throughout her reign, she has been a constant in our lives, and while much has changed around us, we always had the security that came with knowing she was there. Rest in peace, Your Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, and God save the King.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of the people of Robertson, I wish to extend our condolences to King Charles III and to the royal family on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, a Queen who dedicated her life to the service of the community, of the Commonwealth, and never wavered from responsibility. We pay tribute to a remarkable life and we pay tribute to a historic reign. Queen Elizabeth II was, without a doubt, a constant and reassuring figure during her reign from 1953 to 2022. Queen Elizabeth II is the only monarch that I have ever known in my lifetime, and I will always admire her stoic dedication to service as leader of the Commonwealth, of which Australia is a proud member. Queen Elizabeth II was coronated in June 1953 after the passing of her father. After becoming Queen, her reign included numerous visits to Australia, and it is clear through these many visits that she had a fond appreciation of Australia, of the land and of its people. Queen Elizabeth II's first visit to Australia as Queen, and the only reigning monarch to have ever done so, was following her coronation in 1954. The official royal tour covered large swathes of the nation, and it is said that 3/4 of the Australian population came out to witness and meet with Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. Of particular note, Her Majesty's visit to the Central Coast. It was during the journey from Sydney to Newcastle, where the royal train would slow down at Gosford Station and at Wyong Station so that Her Majesty would greet the crowd, and so that the people of the Central Coast could bear witness to their monarch, to their head of state. The Queen and Duke spent 6 months touring the Commonwealth nations, and this was a huge success, demonstrating the dedication she would continue to example throughout her reign as monarch. On a more personal level, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, during the times of rising infection, rising admissions to hospital and intensive care, during the time prior to the rollout of vaccinations, the Queen broadcasted a message. That message titled, "We will meet again." For those on the front line providing medical care, those transporting our goods, stocking our shelves, this was a message of inspiration, a message of motivation and encouragement.
in what was one of the darkest times outside of conflict in our nation's history. Her Majesty's recognition of those who were grieving, those who were experiencing incredible financial difficulties, and to those who have had enormous change in their lives. The message was a testament to the steadfast commitment she had for the people of the Commonwealth. In total, the Queen came to Australia 16 times over her reign, and our nation was always a priority. The Queen kept abreast to developing situations in Australia and shared with us in times of celebration, as well as commiserated with us during the more challenging periods. This was highlighted during times of national crises, like of the recent bushfires in 2019 and 2020, and during floods that impacted large areas of our country. Queen Elizabeth II was Britain's longest-reigning monarch, and a queen who had a strong sense of duty and a determination to dedicate her life to the people. For many citizens in Australia and around the world, the Queen represented a constant presence in a rapidly changing world. Here in Australia, it has been a time of mixed emotions for many, and this is understandable. However, the outpouring of emotion shown since her passing demonstrates what an extraordinary leader she was. In our electorate, people have come from all over the region to sign the condolence book, both Republicans and monarchists alike sharing their unique story and memories of Her Majesty. I thank the Queen for her service to our constitutional monarchy here in Australia and her guidance over her reign. Thank you for your service, Queen Elizabeth II. May you now rest in peace.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Many words have been used to describe Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in recent days. Steadfast, constant, reassuring, dignified, devoted, dutiful, loyal, reliable and quietly fun. Her commitment to the service of the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth have been lauded again and again by people not just from Commonwealth countries, but by people all around the globe. In this rapidly changing, often alarming world, it was reassuring to have the Queen as a reliable steward, a constant in the background of our lives. She could be counted on for 70 unwavering years. At 96 years old, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was the longest-ruling monarch in British history, a time that stretches through the administration of 16 Australian and 15 British Prime Ministers. Known for her humour and wit, her first words to the Right Honourable Sir Tony Blair were, "My first Prime Minister was Churchill, and that was before you were born." Churchill was born in 1874. Queen Elizabeth II was a link to our past and an anchor in our present. It is rare today to see someone stand so resolutely in their duty, and she did so through epochs of enormous change. We first saw the leadership qualities of the Queen in World War II as a young princess when the Messerschmitt bombs rained down on Buckingham Palace and the surrounds. She was evacuated to Windsor Castle like millions of other children retreating to the country, away from the Blitz. To comfort the children of Britain and their parents, a 13-year-old princess gave her first public address, saying, "Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all." Her example as a teenager in that war further included training up as a mechanic in the Auxiliary Territory Service. She was there, shoring up the morale of Britain and inspiring many to serve the Commonwealth when it was so gravely in danger from the tyranny that marched across Europe. Then post-war, when the Iron Curtain guillotined our world and nuclear war threatened our survival, she was there. She received Mikhail Gorbachev at Windsor just 7 months before the Berlin Wall fell. Historian Robert Hardman considered that one lunch had achieved a more powerful diplomatic impact than so many of the 110 sumptuous state visits before or since. In the late 70s and 80s, a change swept through much of the world. Asia industrialised and the empire waned in many corners of continents as countries turned into republics. She was there, recognising and accepting the people's will. The Queen's words of comfort and guidance bookended her life. During the early COVID pandemic, she again gave words of hope and comfort, as she had at so many other times in her life. She assured us that we could and would prevail in those frightening times, and indeed she reminded us that not only could we survive, but we could benefit from the hiatus in normal life. Such was her stoicism. In her last days, with nuclear war threatening and recessions threatening and ongoing scandals thrusting a change of Prime Minister upon her country, she was there, as always, as a steady hand, although that hand was frail and bruised. Just 2 days before her death, obviously frail and in discomfort, she performed her duty to swear in the new Prime Minister, as always with a smile on her face and a light in her eye. To me, this moment is an undeniable emblem of her stoicism and depth of character. It is a moment of deep inspiration because it was built on an unfailing lifetime of selflessness and duty. I would also like to pay tribute to the Queen Elizabeth's role as a powerful female leader who commanded deep respect around the world. She stood as an inspiration for women for decades, an example of the strength of female leaders, with her leadership style of gentleness and strength, grace and stoicism, and unwavering commitment to her ideals. The Queen was deeply sentimental about Australia. In her royal tour of Australia in 2000, she expressed, "Whatever the future may bring, my lasting respect and affection."
Time has expired.
Thank you.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Today, on behalf of the people of Cunningham, I join in extending our deepest condolences to His Majesty the King and the royal family on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty's influence on the world, our nation and my community in Cunningham is undeniable. This has been reflected in the outpouring of support from the people in my region expressing their condolences. There is deep recognition and respect for the Queen and her life of immense service to the people of the Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth is remembered for her strong sense of duty. In the year following her coronation, as we've heard today, the Queen embarked on a tour of the Commonwealth, including Australia. It is estimated that 3/4 of Australians turned out to see the Queen on her 1954 visit to Australia. The visit was so vast that then Prime Minister Robert Menzies proposed in Parliament that future visits be less formal due to the work involved in organising it. But the visit was a momentous occasion for Australia and for my region in the Illawarra. My electorate of Cunningham received 2 royal visits from Her Majesty. The first was on the 11th of February 1954. The Queen arrived in Wollongong and the streets were filled with supporters. Estimates put the onlookers at 80,000. The Illawarra Mercury also reported that keen locals had offered £20 or $700 in today's money for a seat at the window on the 2nd story of the Wollongong Hotel, all for a better view of the procession. 16 trains transported more than 9,000 children to Wollongong CBD for the event, and 4.5 kilometres of wiring connected 58 speakers along the route so everybody could hear. 15-year-old Wollongong High School captain Margaret Battelle had been chosen to welcome the Queen and the Duke. In Her Majesty's address on the day, Queen Elizabeth noted the role that Wollongong was playing in the growth of Australia's industrial strength, a role that I am happy we will continue to play now into the future. 500 ex-servicemen from 3 wars formed a guard of honour on Church Street for Her Majesty as she made her way to the Returned Soldiers Memorial Hall, where the Queen was to preside at the official luncheon. Veterans from sub-branches, including Albion Park, Ostermere, Bowral, Coldale, Corrimal, Dapto, Gerringong, Helensburgh, Kiama, Moss Vale, Nowra, Port Kembla and Woonona were also in attendance. As the Duke tried to talk to some of the veterans, he had to lean in close to hear them over the roar of the crowd. Following this visit, a film was produced and shown in local theatres. The film has since been shared by the University of Wollongong Library and recently has been on the Lost Wollongong and Yesterday Stories Facebook pages. It is a brilliant piece of history, providing valuable insight into a historic day for our region. It was during Her Majesty's second visit in 1970 that she granted the title of Lord Mayor to the city and the name City of Wollongong was adopted. On Friday the 10th of April 1970, Royal Yacht Britannia docked at Port Kembla and the Queen and Duke, accompanied by Princess Anne, departed for the Town Hall. Thousands lined the streets as the Queen travelled to the Wollongong Teachers College to meet faculty members and students from local schools, before eventually departing from Albion Park Airport to fly to Newcastle. Many other constituents have shared the sense of excitement that overtook the community as the entire region gathered around these historic visits. I am honoured to speak today on this condolence motion and to express some of the sentiment that has emerged from my seat of Cunningham. Queen Elizabeth inspired countless people's love, admiration, respect and devotion. We thank her for a life lived in service to our people. After a long and full life of service, may she now rest in peace.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I rise today to pay respect and offer condolences on behalf of the people of O'Connor on the passing of the Queen Elizabeth II after 70 years of rule, and to convey the overwhelming feelings of gratitude and respect that have been expressed by my constituents over the last 2 weeks. Mr Speaker, it's fitting today that we recognise and honour a life defined by extraordinary and selfless service, grace, dignity and exemplary leadership of a Commonwealth of 54 nations. Queen Elizabeth's reign of 70 years began on the passing of her father in 1952 and is the longest of any British monarch. The Queen visited Australia 16 times, overseeing the coming and going of our Prime Ministers 16 times. In fact, when the Queen visited Australia in 1954, it was the first time a reigning monarch had visited our shores. On that visit, the Queen and Prince Philip spent 58 days down under and visited 57 towns and cities, including the beautiful and historic south coastal city of Albany. The Queen visited Albany again in March 1977 as part of the celebrations of 150 years of European settlement in Western Australia, and I'm hoping that King Charles will be able to visit in 2026 for the bicentenary. In 1954, the Queen also visited West Australia's economic powerhouse, the city of Kalgoorlie-Boulder, returning for a second visit in 1988. There are many older residents of both Albany and Kalgoorlie-Boulder who have recalled their vivid and fond memories of those visits in recent days. During the course of those 16 visits, the Queen officiated the opening of some of our famous and most iconic buildings and institutions, such as the Sydney Opera House in 1973 and this very Parliament House in 1988. The Queen has been a constant, reassuring presence in the lives of the people of O'Connor, and as I travel the vast electorate, the portrait of the Queen is always present in our town halls, our CWAs, our ag societies, our Girl Guide and Scout halls, to name just a few. The incredible scenes of public grief and mourning that we have witnessed over the last 2 weeks have borne testament to the extraordinary affection that the public of all nationalities held for Queen Elizabeth. The royal funeral, broadcast to billions of people around the world, was a sombre reminder that the monarchy is as much about the 900-year-old institution as it is about the individual. At this sad time, we must remember that there is a family at the head of that institution who are grieving the loss of a mother, a grandmother and great-grandmother. I extend my condolences to King Charles III and the extended royal family. Mr Speaker, in conclusion, on behalf of the people of O'Connor, I thank Queen Elizabeth II for a lifetime of dedication, service and devotion to her people. May her soul rest in peace.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Fenner.
Only one serving British monarch has ever visited Australia, Only one British monarch has ever had her head appear on Australia's decimal currency. 87% of Australians have only ever known one monarch in our lifetimes. If the first Elizabethan age represented the English Renaissance, the second Elizabethan age is marked by its extraordinary longevity. As the Prime Minister pointed out this morning, it spanned 16 Australian PMs, starting with Menzies, 16 GGs, starting with McKell, and included 16 visits to Australia, the first lasting two months. Queen Elizabeth didn't live here, but during her 70-year reign she met more Australians and travelled to more parts of Australia than most of us do. She made a broadcast over the Royal Flying Doctors Network from Broken Hill, opened the Opera House and Parliament House, consoled Australians who'd suffered loss, and sent thousands of congratulatory messages to centenarians and couples celebrating their diamond anniversaries. My hometown of Canberra witnessed some of the most remarkable moments in Queen Elizabeth's visits to Australia. Now, if you've ever taken a tour of Parliament, you may have heard the guide tell you that by being here in the House of Representatives, you're in the one place the monarch can never enter. That convention has existed since 1642, when King Charles I, accompanied by armed guards, entered the English House of Commons and attempted to arrest some of its members. His actions led to the English Civil War and the beheading of Charles I in 1649. Since then, no monarch has ever entered the House of Commons and, so the tour guides might tell you, the Australian House of Representatives. But it's not true. On the 14th of February 1954, a 27-year-old Queen Elizabeth paid an unofficial visit to Old Parliament House. The Speaker, Archie Cameron, asked if she'd like to see the House of Representatives, suggesting it would be okay because it was a Sunday and it's a long time since Charles I. Queen Elizabeth said yes. The doors were unlocked and she spent 7 minutes in the House, making her the first British monarch to enter the People's House for 3 centuries. Traditions can change. Reading the accounts of that 1954 visit is a reminder of a faraway age. At the State Ball, members of Parliament were told they could only bring their partners if they were married. Guests were served pheasant, boar's head and Scottish salmon. Many practised their curtsies. The Canberra Times proudly reported that 40,000 people saw the royal couple when they arrived, which isn't bad for a city of 28,000. Queen Elizabeth saw Canberra evolve. When she visited in 1977, she remarked, "We first came here 23 years ago, long before there was a lake and when the capital was described as 7 suburbs in search of a city. That city has now been found, and it is one of charm and character. It has become worthy of the nation." On her 1988 visit, Queen Elizabeth visited Canberra's Thoroughbred Park, joining Bob Hawke in the grandstand that is now named in her honour. They shared a love of the sport, and the day was immortalised in one of those iconic Hawkeye photos. Like Hawke, many Australians related to her enjoyment of horse races, as well as her many other well-known passions: marmalade sandwiches, corgis, faith, family and a commitment to charity. The death of Queen Elizabeth is a reminder that, as Noel Pearson has pointed out, Australian national identity involves the confluence of 3 powerful rivers. Indigenous Australians have occupied this land for at least 65,000 years, a period that predates the human settlement of Europe. The second source of identity comes from the British institutions that underpin our legal system and market economy and bind us together through colonialism, shared sacrifice in war and a common culture. And the third river is multiculturalism, our integration of a higher share of migrants than any other advanced nation. Like many of my fellow citizens, I'd like to see an Australian head of state, but that transition will only happen with a proper recognition of history and the role the monarchy has played in it. To be a more complete Commonwealth, we must acknowledge our past as we work together to build a stronger future. In that history, no monarch has been more significant than Queen Elizabeth II. May she rest in peace.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. From 1952 to 2022, Her Majesty was served by 16 Australian Prime Ministers. I stand here representing a seat named after her first and perhaps most devoted, Sir Robert Menzies. To those who engage in generalities, it may be of significance that almost two-thirds of the families in my electorate are first- or second-generation migrants. Some may fairly ask, why would the Crown matter to families who do not come from the United Kingdom? And this is the problem with generalities. They turn a blind eye to the virtue and value of tradition in any culture. Migrants come here with eyes and hearts wide open. They come here recognising the role tradition plays in binding us to those who have come before and those who will come after. There is perhaps no better example of this than Her Majesty's historic visit to the Republic of Ireland in 2011, the first by a reigning monarch in a century, and also the country of my birth. On any measure, it is perhaps one of the toughest audiences that she could face. Yet after Her Majesty spoke at Dublin Castle, the newspaper The Irish Independent recounted the reception as follows. It was a moving speech, delivered in clear, cut crystal voice. And after the toast, the room stood and applauded, not just polite applause, but sustained, heartfelt appreciation of the bridge that the Queen herself had built. She had the look of a woman for whom the weight of history had just got a lot lighter. So I stand here deeply moved by Her Majesty's passing, deeply grateful for a life of service, and deeply proud of Her Majesty's devotion to the Crown's role in defending democracy. It may seem to be a paradox that an institution headed by a person there by birth can defend democracy. Maybe it is the mark of a first-rate democracy that these two ideas, a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy, work in tandem as they do. In Sir Robert Menzies' own memoir, Afternoon Light, he addresses the point with precision, and I quote, "The focal point is also an office, the Crown, now occupied by a woman, the Queen. Her actual powers are small. She never enters the political lists. The Queen is seen, in all the countries within her allegiance, as the foundation of honour, the protector of the law, the centre of a parliamentary system, a fixed point in a whirl of circumstance. In every key speech to this institution, and we've heard them told in many of the wonderful condolence motions, Her Majesty made this point abundantly clear. At the opening of this building, I'd like to single this part out, and I quote, "Commitment to parliamentary democracy lies at the heart of this nation's maturity, tolerance and humanity. This is surely one of the characteristics that has attracted so many people to come to Australia. Mr. Speaker, the gift and genius of Her Majesty's reign was the lightness of her touch. That restraint is no easy thing. To be absolutely impartial is arguably not human. We see it in our newspapers today, many advocates claiming that their cause is the exception for interference by a monarch. In her restraint, the Queen deferred to the people through their representatives here. In doing so, the Queen gave Australia room to grow and mature as a nation. And for that, and on behalf of the people of Menzies, I want to say thank you. To our new King, when Sir Robert Menzies died after a heart attack in 1978, you flew from Britain to attend the state funeral in Melbourne as the Queen's representative. I was proud to see our representatives from this place fly to your side in your time of grief. We know you will make a fine king. More than that, we know you will defend democracy and you will make your mother proud." I thank the House.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Durack.
I rise today to speak on the condolence motion for the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Mr Speaker, in the last 2 weeks it seems much of the world has stopped to mourn the passing of Her Majesty. The depth of love, respect and admiration for the Queen has been felt not just in the Commonwealth but across the globe. Her Majesty was an inspiration and guiding light to many. Her Majesty made several visits to regional Western Australia, sharing her sense of dignity, grace and strength and occasionally her sense of humour. Today it is my privilege to recount memories shared by some of my Durack constituents. One clear recounted memory was during the Queen's visit to Geraldton in 1988. My constituent, much-loved local Barb Thompson, was lined up with her husband and baby son. They had all rushed down from the service station they owned, still in their work clothes, and were very excited at the prospect of seeing the Queen. As the Queen passed by, Barb's husband smiled at the Queen and said, "G'day, Your Majesty." To their surprise, the Queen turned around and came back to speak to them. Her Majesty admired their 8-month-old son, stating, "He is a dear little boy. I have a few grandsons myself." She then tickled the little one's toes for a moment. Those photos taken at this encounter, Mr Speaker, were published in newspapers right across the country. Very proud moment for Geraldton. Barb recalls the Queen's warm, friendly and genuine manner, as well as her sparkling blue eyes and the beautiful brooch she wore that sparkled in the Gero sun. An additional memory from another constituent who was a Year 8 girl from a farming family remembers a very strong female leader and a woman who held herself with poise and power. She loved her fabulous yellow outfit and recalls thinking, "Why blend in when you can stand out?" The Queen was no stranger to Durack, having made numerous visits to my vast electorate during her royal tours. Next March will mark 60 years since the Queen stepped onto the old town jetty in Roebuck Bay in Broome. This was a very exciting sight for Broome, Mr Speaker, locals considering most were used to seeing pearling boats at the jetty as opposed to royal yachts. Sporting her signature pearl necklace, the Queen spent her time in Broome chatting with locals and admiring the local pearling harvest. It must have been a very proud moment for the Broome pearlers that day, knowing how much the Queen loved and appreciated pearls, something that the Queen and I, Mr Speaker, have in common. Since her passing, many have had the time to reflect on the sense of stability that Her Majesty gave us. She was a constant, reliable fixture in our lives, for most of us, all of our life. The passing of the Queen is a loss of familiarity. It is a little like losing your favourite auntie, Mr Speaker, or someone very dear to you, an important person in your life. As a woman like myself who likes to dress in bright, beautiful colours, I was very inspired by Her Majesty's incredible, immaculate dress sense, and I don't think enough has been said about this. Her Majesty set an impeccable example in every way, and her attention to detail with her appearance gave us just a bit of an insight into how she managed her duties as our sovereign. Personally, I'm not surprised at the outpouring of love and respect for our Queen from all corners of the globe. But I have long thought that it is a real shame that all the good things that people say about someone upon their passing, that it would be good if they could say those things when that individual was alive. I only hope that Our Majesty, our Sovereign, our Queen knows just how much she is loved, admired and respected. On behalf of the people who call Durack home, Mr Speaker, I would like to express my sincere condolences to the royal family, particularly to King Charles III. It is clear how much the King loved his mother. She was Queen to us, but she was dear mummy to him. I wish our King a long life and to be given a chance to fulfil his duty with grace and devotion, just as his mother did before him. I recall with fondness, Mr Speaker, the time I met King Charles on Lady Elliot Island in 2018. He was very respectful and kind and warm, and he was particularly interested in how long it had taken me to get to Lady Elliot Island from regional Western Australia. I assured him it was almost a whole day. Like many other electorates, my officers in Broome and Geraldton have received several touching messages of sympathy, lovingly, thoughtfully written in our condolence books. One entry by Mr Chris Whiting of Nabboa comes to mind, an entry which I believe sums up the mood of the nation. Chris wrote the following: "R.I.P. ma'am. I served for 14 years. Best boss I ever had. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Well said, Member for Durack. I give the call to the member for Braddon.
Thank you, Speaker. It is with great humility that I rise today as Braddon's representative to this place, to mourn the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, to acknowledge Her Majesty's unwavering devotion to our nation and to commemorate a lifetime of service to her people. Speaker, the electorate of Braddon has many hallmarks. Amongst them is loyalty. Loyalty to each other, loyalty to their communities, loyalty to their nation and to their Queen. Her Majesty has been an ever-present constant in our lives, and now, sadly, that constant has gone. The impact of the loss is great, and it has been marked by an unprecedented outpouring of grief across the northwest, the west coast and King Island in the state of Tasmania. It has been a time of personal reflection for many. Hundreds have contacted my office to sign the condolence book and to reflect on the impact of the Queen's passing and that impact that it had on their lives. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was the Queen of our lifetime. It was just a year after her coronation in February 1954 when Queen Elizabeth became the first reigning monarch to visit the beautiful island state of Tasmania. Fittingly, it was the year of Tasmania's centenary, and regional Tasmania wasn't forgotten either, Speaker. On Tuesday, the 24th of February 1954, Her Majesty, accompanied by her beloved husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, flew from Hobart to the Wynyard Aerodrome on the northwest coast. There was a royal procession through the small rural towns of Wynyard, through Burnie, Penguin, Ulverston, through Devonport and Latrobe. There were official engagements in Burnie and Devonport, and thousands lined the streets to catch a glimpse just of their Queen. When reflecting of her time in Tasmania, the Queen said, "My stay in Tasmania has, of necessity, been all too short, but we shall carry away happy memories of the charm of your island state and the steadfast kindness of its people." True to her word, Her Majesty would return to Tasmania a further 6 times. On the 26th of April 1988, Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh again returned to the northwest coast of Tasmania. It was to be an historical day for the township of Burnie, and at a reception at the Burnie Civic Centre, Her Majesty officially handed Mayor Rex Collins the scroll that proclaimed Burnie a city. Again, the streets were lined with well-wishers, excited to catch a glimpse of their Queen. Speaker, Tasmania has a proud military history, and for 70 years our Commander-in-Chief of the Defence Force has been Queen Elizabeth II. The Victoria Cross is Australia's highest military honour, named after the Queen's great-grandmother, and is the preeminent award for supreme acts of bravery in wartime. Tasmania has the proud honour of having more Victoria Cross recipients per capita than any state or territory in the nation. For 70 years, members of the Australian Defence Force have sworn an oath under Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. As a much younger 18-year-old, I too am eternally proud to have sworn that same oath. For me and for many others of the Defence Force, tradition and history are the fundamental pillars on which our defence of our nation is built. To loyally serve the people of Australia and its Queen is what members of the ADF literally devote their lives to, and there has been no finer role model. No finer role model when it comes to service and dedication than that of Queen Elizabeth II during her 70-year reign. After a lifetime of service, Your Majesty, may you forever rest in peace with your beloved husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. On behalf of the electorate of Braddon and of the state of Tasmania, Vale Queen Elizabeth II.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Honourable Member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's an honour to rise today as a representative of the people of Indi to pay tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, to her life spent in service to the Commonwealth and to the way she fulfilled her duty with dignity, honour and good humour. We come together to express our gratitude for her unwavering service, for her grace and her devotion. This service across many decades spanned extraordinary global change, and throughout it all, Queen Elizabeth was steadfast in her leadership, a constant presence in a sea of change who quietly, incrementally accepted that changing world. And while we saw the public side, we know she was also a beloved wife, mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. Our thoughts are with King Charles III and with her family at this time. Queen Elizabeth II was the most famous woman in the world, but death comes to all of us, and her passing brings us back to our shared humanity as we reflect on our own experiences of grief and mortality. For her own generation, there was a sense of a parallel life, similar experiences shared, including as a young woman taking shelter from the Blitz to being an active duty member of the British Armed Forces. The Queen, while staunch in tradition, showed that she could adapt to the times, illustrated from when she presented the Beatles with MBEs, despite some significant backlash. And this continued through the decades with this year's Platinum Jubilee and a video of the Queen clinking her teacup along to the beat of the classic Queen song, "We Will Rock You." Over her 70 years of service, Her Majesty made 16 visits to Australia, and of course in Indi we are proud to have our own little connection when Her Majesty's tour in 1954 brought her to Gurumbat and Benalla. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip stayed the night on the royal train at the tiny, tiny town of Gurumbat on the 4th of March 1954 before attending a series of events in Benalla the next day. The train station had been decorated with greenery, bunting and flags and an archway erected on the track by the Gurumbat CWA members, and many, many people came to wave to the royal couple. The next day in Benalla, people travelled from far and wide to see the Queen and Prince. The Benalla ensign reported that she captured the hearts of 40,000 people who thronged to town to welcome her. That's about 5 times the population of Benalla at that time. Mr Speaker, one person who was there was Coral Hall, who wrote on the website Great Australian Stories of her school trip to see the Queen that day in Benalla. Coral said, "Queen Elizabeth II was coming to Australia and coming to Benalla. It was hard to believe. Suddenly a cheer rose up as the large black Royal Rolls-Royce turned onto the cycling track. 'Here she comes!' cried out our teacher. We all began to wave our Australian flags, and as the royal car was completely open, we could get a quick view of our Queen. I think it took 12 seconds to pass. I didn't get time to look at Prince Philip. My short glimpse revealed a very pretty young lady wearing a small hat and waving a white-gloved hand. I wondered to myself, her hat was lovely, but where was her crown? I was only 12 and a half, from a rural farm, and I thought all queens wore crowns." Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip also visited Albury in 1988, when tens of thousands of people turned out to greet the royals. The Border Mail reported that the Queen was gifted flowers from Laos migrants and a coat hanger from a woman from Yakandanda. In my electorate of Indi, many messages of condolence from local people have been shared with my office. Almost every message left for the Queen by the people of Indi spoke of her service, her devotion to others. They said that she was an inspiration. One message simply said, "I'm going to miss your smile." And we will miss Her Majesty in many ways, but in doing that we can reflect on a life well lived, on devoted service, on duty fulfilled with compassion and love, and on the value of public service. By a woman who understood that transition and change is inevitable and good and to be embraced. Australia is a vastly different nation today to the one that the young Queen visited all those years ago, and she knew that. As the chapter is closed on the second Elizabethan era, we are now rightfully and respectfully challenged, I believe, to acknowledge and reconcile with our complete history, to truly hear the voices of our First Nations Australians and write the next chapter of our Australian nation. Vale, Queen Elizabeth II, rest in peace. You have served us honourably.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to. I'll put the question. All of those opinions say aye. Aye. Against noes. I think the ayes have it. As a mark of respect to the memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Monday.